This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, Matt, if you want to take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Scott. Thanks for everyone for joining us today. This is our second webinar for Train the Trainer regarding the new entry-level driver training requirements that's going into effect in just a few weeks, February 7th, 2022. This project we did for the Clear Roads Consortium to really develop content and look at the requirements for the new entry-level driver training regulation that is going into effect in a few weeks from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. I was the PI on that project. Scott Tidwell, who introduced us to that, or introduced, spoke right at the beginning of this, was co-PI. And then we also had our consultant, Chris, to really help nail down all the content. So Scott, can you introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. As Matt said, I'm Scott Tidwell. I was the co-PI, and I'm a senior field research technician at the Division of Freight Transit and Heavy Vehicle Safety at the Virginia Tech Transportation Institute. I've been there for 20 years now doing research. The past 16 years, I've worked primarily with commercial motor vehicles, specializing in new safety technologies such as forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, and driver training. I currently also hold a Class A CDL with my tanker, doubles, triples, and passenger endorsements. Chris?
Thanks, Scott. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Chris Antonick, and of course, very happy to be here with you and happy to help you with your transition into the new entry-level driver training program. And on the last webinar, I did say it's new, but in fact, it really isn't new. This is the old 1985 model curriculum from the Bureau of Motor Carrier Safety that the whole regulation is based on. I've been familiar with that model curriculum for some years as my time with Delaware Tech as the department chair. During my time there, we brought the Commercial Transportation Studies curriculum up to speed using that model curriculum and PTDI standards, which were also based on this model curriculum, which is essentially the same as this regulation that we are going to be discussing today. I'm also a United States Air Force veteran, had the honor many years after my active duty time of advising them as they upgraded their tractor trailer driver training curriculum to meet these standards. I've assisted the AMVA in the pilot testing of the 2004 revisions to the CDL testing. I've assisted Delaware DMV to help train their CDL examiners. I've worked with Virginia.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Can you unmute yourself?
Okay. How long ago did I get muted?
Just a few seconds ago.
Okay. Anyway, I hold a Master of Education in Career Technical Education, along with a fully credentialed CDL Class A with tanker, hazmat, doubles, triples, passengers. And I use that CDL part-time as a petroleum transport driver, holding 9,000 gallon loads of gasoline and diesel. I just did that yesterday and Monday, matter of fact. But in respect to my background, I got to honestly confess that after over 45 years in commercial driving and training, I don't know it all when it comes to truck driver training. So I got to acknowledge and respect the vast amount of experience and skills that are possessed by you that are here in this webinar. So just to wrap it up, I just want to say that it's my sincere hope to be able to provide some valuable insight and assistance to you as you transition into using this new curriculum. So there it is.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris. So this was a really collaborative effort. We're happy to be here. And the purpose today is to help you guys understand the new regulations. And Chris is going to spend the vast majority of the afternoon talking and giving you guys tips on how to implement the training in your agency. So here's the agenda. For today, the first part is going to be kind of an introduction and overview of the regulations themselves. So Scott and I are going to be leading that. Then we'll have a short break, roughly in about 11:15 Central Time. After the break, we'll go into the theory instruction, have about an hour for lunch, and finally go through the behind the wheel instruction. And then definitely we'll have time at the end for wrap up questions, discussions. But one thing to note is, you guys, we want this to be interactive. We don't want to just be sitting here talking all day. We want you guys to interact with us. We want you to ask us questions. If you need clarification on anything we talk about, 100%, we want you guys to be engaged. That's really the benefit of joining this webinar live versus watching the recording after the fact. You guys have the opportunity to ask what's on your mind, what questions you have. So in Zoom, there is a kind of raise the hand button down at the bottom. Whoever's not talking from our research team, we can be monitoring the chat. We can be looking at participants who have their hands raised, so we'll try to catch it. If we do not answer your question in a timely manner, you guys can free to unmute yourself and ask it live, but we'll try to answer the chat in real time and call on people as we see. Let's see, the PowerPoints that we are going over today in the PDF files, and a recording of this information will be made available in the future on ClearRoad's website. So you can go back after the fact and re-listen to this webinar. You can go in and pull the PowerPoints that we'll be going through today for yourself if you need to train other trainers in the future, if you want to have your own copy and to re-look at all the content we're going over. I know it's a lot of information that we're going to be going over today. So just please bear with us. We'll try to go slow and take our time. So here's just a brief overview of this project. So I mentioned we did this with ClearRoads. It was about a 9-month-long project, started in January. We did a thorough review of the regulation, and we did a survey of ClearRoad states to understand what their current training plans were, and then how they intended to adjust their training plans when the ELDT regulation goes into effect in February. We documented the process for the training provider registry, and we'll talk about what that is in just a few minutes. We also interviewed 3 states to really get at more detailed information on what changes may be required, whether that was information technology changes, hiring, or training changes, HR related changes, and all of that. And then finally, we did an interim webinar back in April to kind of give a status update, talk about what the regulation was so that people at that time could try to get ahead of the regulation and start preparing. Then really the rest of this project was us developing that content that Chris talked about. All right, so the first module, as I mentioned, is just an introduction to the regulation, what the curriculum is. So with this, Scott will take us away.
All right, thanks, Matt. So you'll notice, as Matt pointed out, we have 3 main train the trainer modules that we've developed. We have this first module here that's going to provide an overview and kind of introduction to that regulation, what it is to be a training provider, what it means for your new trainees coming through the program. And then we'll transition into the theory classroom training module and finish up with the behind the wheel training module. You will notice there is some topics repeated throughout the modules, a lot of redundancy. That's for 2 reasons. One is to get the point across, to ensure that you fully understand what this regulation entails and what you will need to do to comply with it. And it's also for the future. If you bring on new hires, you can think of these modules as 3 different pieces. This first module could be aimed more at management, and if you have a CDL coordinator position or somebody that's overseeing the trainers and instructors. Module 2 is primarily would be for the theory instruction. So if you have instructors that are just theory instructors and you hired somebody in that position, you could just have them review that module. And then the third module would be just for your behind the wheel instructors, if that's how you run your training at your agency. So we're going to talk about kind of the entry-level driver training regulation as a whole, talk about some of the major provisions in this module, what it is to be a training provider and what's required on that registry. I assume at this point, a lot of you have probably already registered and gotten your ID number and everything, but this could be a good review, and for those that may have not done that yet. We'll talk about some assessment and record keeping that's required, and then kind of the basic structure and sequence of training that is necessary to comply. So this regulation is federally mandated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, and it applies to all commercial driver's license beginning on February 7th. So a little less than 2 weeks from now, it goes into effect. Just to kind of give you that brief history of this regulation, as Chris mentioned, the 1985 model curriculum that was developed through the Bureau of Motor Carrier Safety, and that was just kind of a standard, like, hey, here's what we think it should be. It was never put into law or any type of regulation. You had the Professional Truck Driver Institute, which kind of modeled that. That was typically your gold standard for training commercial motor vehicle operators. But again, that was not law or required. And then about a decade ago, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration put out a proposed rulemaking for minimum standards. At the time, it actually had minimum hours and some other things required in that regulation. However, they started to get pushback from the industry, threats of lawsuits, mainly from the trucking and bus industry, that it was overbearing. So they pulled that proposed rule, they issued a new rule, then they got pushback from safety advocacy groups and some others that now it wasn't strong enough of a standard. So with that, they came together with an advisory committee made up of 26 members from the truck and bus industry, state driver's licensing agencies, law enforcement, insurance groups, labor unions. And with that committee, it took several years and they finally came to a consensus on minimum training standards. And that's what this new regulation is going into effect on February 7th. So it has all stakeholders' input, and that's what they were hoping for. So this regulation applies to anybody applying for a Class A or B for the first time. It applies to anybody that is upgrading to a Class A or a B. So maybe they have a Class B, but they want to upgrade to a Class A, or maybe they have a Class C and they want to upgrade to a Class B. It will apply to them. It will also apply to those that are seeking their hazardous materials endorsement, passenger and school bus endorsements. And this training that we have provided for Clear Roads covers everything needed to obtain their Class B or Class A CDL, as well as a hazardous materials endorsement. So as you're aware, February 7th, so about a week and a half from now, it goes into effect. And from that point on, commercial driver's licenses will only be issued to persons completing that federally compliant training, which includes they must pass all required theory, they must pass all required behind the wheel training. It must include and document comprehensive testing and assessment of those driver trainees, and that data must be reported to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So, training providers, you have to register with the Federal Carrier Motor Safety Administration. You must register each site where that training will occur. We actually were able to gather some insights since the last webinar. We had access into the TPR. You could see that interface and how it all works. So you would register as a training provider, get your ID number, and then once you have that, then you can register each location where that training area will be, whether it's your district or area or sub-area level, depending on how your agency runs in the state. You must meet all the requirements of that regulation. The instructors must meet all the requirements. Your curriculum must meet those requirements. Your facilities and equipment must meet all requirements of that regulation. And since you are self-certifying, you are subject to penalty of perjury if FMCSA audited you and found that you were not compliant with those regulations. So the major provisions, this regulation is found in 49 CFR Part 380, known as the Code of Federal Regulations or the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. Those can easily be found online just by searching that regulation number or going to the training provider registry site, and they have links on there to get you to the regulation. This applies to both intrastate and interstate CDL drivers. So, you know, most DOTs, you're probably not leaving the state, but it still applies to you regardless. And it establishes the curricula subdivided into theory and behind the wheel topics. And those are subdivided further into different units. And the theory and behind the wheel, it's important to note, can be provided by different training providers or sites. So you could have a new hire that maybe had completed theory in another state. Well, they could now do the behind the wheel training in your state if you hired them on. When it comes to theory instruction, also known as the classroom instruction, there are no minimum hours on the time spent in the classroom for your driver trainees. However, they must be instructed on all elements or units. There's actually 30 different units in that classroom theory instruction that must be covered. And they must receive comprehensive testing and assessment. And those trainees must score at least 80% on those assessments. Now, it is up to you as an agency to decide how you want to administer those assessments. You can do one large assessment at the end of all 30 training units. You could do an assessment at the end of each of the 30 training units. And within those 30, it's divided into, falls under 5 topics, or you could do 5 assessments, one after each of the 5 topics. That is up to you how you want to handle that. However, we recommend that you would do an assessment after each of the 30 training units. That will make it easier, a smaller number of questions per test, and kind of will smoothly transition through each of the topics as you progress. When it comes to behind the wheel instruction, that is the training that is composed on the range and the public roads. There are specified maneuvers within the regulation that must be performed proficiently with repetition. There are no minimum hours required for behind the wheel units. However, that training must demonstrate proficiency in all of the required skills. So training providers, to be a training provider, you must provide instruction in the curriculum that meets the rule. And you have to meet the eligibility requirements on the training provider registry. You attest or self-certify that you meet those requirements. And in the event of an audit, you must supply your records and documentation to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So when it comes to behind the wheel instructors, to be eligible, it is an individual that provides behind the wheel training involving the actual operation of a commercial motor vehicle for an entry-level driver, either on the range or a public road. And they have to meet one of the 2 qualifications. It's either they hold a CDL of the same class or higher and have 2 years driving experience with that class of CDL license, and they meet all other state requirements for your state to be an instructor, or they hold a CDL of the same or higher class that they will be teaching and have 2 years experience as a CMV instructor and meet all other state requirements. Now, we followed up since the last webinar and got clarification from FMCSA that 2 years as an instructor does not have to be 2 years with the same class that they are currently teaching. So let's say you had an instructor that had a Class B license, and they recently got their Class A CDL. So they have that class of license that meets being able to teach. 2 years of experience as an instructor can be a mix of Class B and Class A, or they could have 2 years of Class B, just recently get their Class A, and they can still teach Class A CDL instruction. So I just want to make sure that's clarified there, because I know that may happen in some instances. And also, it's important to note that They are prohibited from engaging in behind the wheel instruction for 2 years if their CDL is canceled, suspended, or revoked for any of the disqualifying offenses in the regulations. So that includes, reckless driving, alcohol and drug testing, running railroad crossings, things like that. So if they lose their license, then they cannot instruct for 2 years. Some important definitions. So an entry-level driver is an individual who must complete the CDL skills test requirements for the first time, where they are upgrading to a Class A or to a Class B, where they're obtaining their hazmat, passenger, or school bus endorsement for the first time. Now, it does not include those for whom states waive CDL skills tests. So you might have some new hires that fall under the 383.77. That is those that have the exception because they drove commercial vehicles in the military. And it also doesn't include those seeking to remove a restriction. And those restrictions are talking about if somebody has previously tested and gotten their commercial driver's license, but they have an air brakes restriction or air over hydraulic brakes restriction or automatic transmission only restriction. In that case, let's say someone wants to remove the automatic transmission restriction, they can go to the state driver's licensing agency and they don't have to take the entire skills test again. All they have to do is demonstrate proficiency that they can shift the manual transmission or demonstrate that they can safely do the pre-trip inspection on the air brake system and know how that air brake system operates and pass the knowledge test. So those are some exceptions to what an entry-level driver is considered. So important definitions of entry-level driver training. So it's the training that an entry-level driver receives from a provider listed on FMCSA's training provider registry. As of February 7th, anybody will be able to go onto that site and pull all of the training providers that are registered in that state that they're looking up. So that will be available for everybody to see. Entry-level driver training, entry-level driver must, prior to taking the state driver's licensing agency for Class A or Class B skills test for the first time. And I'll point out that could be a third-party examiner. We have it as state driver's licensing agency, but also some states allow third-party examiners. Prior to taking the state driver's licensing skills test to upgrade to a Class A or B, or obtaining your hazmat, passenger, and school bus endorsement for the first time. So when it comes to the range, a range in the regulation is defined in an area that must be free of obstructions, enables the driver trainee to maneuver safely and free from interference of other vehicles and hazards, and has an adequate sight line and is large enough for you to perform the backing maneuvers in that area. So behind the wheel range training is training that is provided by a certified behind the wheel instructor and occurs on the off-road driving range. And it's when the trainee has control of the power unit. That doesn't count, obviously you're going to do practice, you're going to show some examples of the different backing maneuvers, but the actual training is only when that trainee is behind the wheel controlling the power unit. You will follow the lesson plan for that specific day and unit of training. And it also does not include time when that trainee is outside of the vehicle observing. Public road training. So that's, again, training provided by a certified behind the wheel instructor, but it occurs on a public road rather than an off-road range. And again, the trainee has to be behind the wheel for it to count. And again, you follow the lesson plans for that unit and day. And again, it does not include observation time. So not when the trainee's in the passenger seat observing you, that does not count for their time. And you remember there's no minimum hours, but we'll talk about the time that still has to be documented coming up here. Some other definitions. Theory instruction is knowledge instruction on the operation of a commercial motor vehicle and related matters provided by a theory instructor through lectures, demonstrations, audiovisual presentations, computer-based instruction, driving simulation devices, online training, or other similar means. And it's very similar to the behind the wheel. They have to hold the same or higher class of CDL that they intend to instruct on and have 2 years of driving experience as well as meet the state requirements, or have the same or higher class of CDL and have 2 years experience as a commercial motor vehicle instructor, and again, meet that state requirements. And they have the same, they can't teach for 2 years if their CDL has been suspended, revoked, or canceled for any reason. There are some exceptions to the theory instructor qualifications. An instructor is not required to hold a CDL of the same or higher class with all endorsements necessary to operate the CMV for which the training is to be provided if that instructor previously held the CDL of that same class or higher and then complies with all other requirements of that definition. Training providers offering online content exclusively do not have to meet the state requirements for theory instructor if your state has any additional requirements. And a training provider means any entity that's listed on the training provider registry, and that's included but not limited to training schools, educational institutions, rural electric cooperatives, motor carriers, state and local government agencies such as DOTs, school districts, joint labor management programs, as well as owner operators can also be registered in a certified training provider. So now we're going to talk about some of the requirements for those that may not have started this process yet. So to be eligible to be listed on the training provider registry, you must certify that your curriculum meets the criteria set forth in the regulation, that you use the facilities that meet the regulation, you self-certify that your vehicles meet the regulation, and you certify that your driver training instructors also meet the eligibility criteria certified or set forth in that regulation. You have to be licensed, certified, and registered to provide training in accordance with any specific laws and regulations for your state where the training will occur. And again, that exception is the theory training. If you only are going to utilize online theory training, then you don't have to meet the state requirements for that part of it. And also, you have to allow the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration or its representative to audit you at any point in time. And that is all documents, training materials, curriculum has to be provided to them in the event of an audit. Some other things that are required: you must electronically transmit the training provider registration form through their website. And that's where you self-certify that you meet all of the requirements. And then you will obtain a unique training provider registry number. And again, if you have more than one location, you must register each of those locations to provide training. And when you meet all the requirements, they issue that unique TPR number. So as an entry-level training provider, you must require that all of your driver trainees certify that they will comply with the DOT regulations set forth in parts 40, 382, 383, and 391, as well as meet all state and local laws. And that's basically relating to controlled substances, the testing of those substances, age, medical certification, their driver record, and their licensing. You must all verify that all accepted driver trainees hold a valid commercial learner's permit or CDL as applicable. And training providers offering online training must ensure that the content is prepared and or delivered by a theory instructor as defined in the regulation. And again, separate training providers may deliver the theory and behind the wheel portions of the training, but when it comes to behind the wheel, the same provider has to provide both the range and public road. Those can't be split between two different providers. And one thing that comes to mind too, you might be wondering, if they have their commercial learner's permit prior to February 7th, how does that affect them? As long as they have their commercial learner's permit prior to February 7th, then this new entry-level driver training regulation does not apply to them. They will not have to go through this certified training. It provided that they do not let their commercial learner's permit expire. They complete all training and tests prior to that expiration on their learner's permit. Facilities, you have to ensure that your classroom complies with all federal, state, and or local statutes and regulations. You know, obviously you want a big enough area for the number of driver trainees you have. It's a comfortable area for them to sit down and go through that instruction. Equipment, all your equipment must comply with federal and state safety requirements. And as a state DOT, I'm sure all your equipment is fine. You won't have any issues there. And the training vehicles must be in the same group and type that the driver and trainees intend to operate with their CDL. So, you know, there are some restrictions. I know the majority of DOTs probably train your drivers. I think who we talked to, about 85% go through with dump truck and pintle hook trailers. They get that Class O restriction on their license. So you couldn't train somebody with a dump truck and a pintle hook trailer and then send them to the DMV and test in a fifth wheel configuration. So if they're going to test in a fifth wheel, then you're going to have to train them in a fifth wheel. Assessments. Again, you have to use those assessments to determine their proficiency in the knowledge objectives. And that's through each portion or each unit, how you choose to do that assessment. The driver trainees must receive an overall minimum score of 80% on each of those assessments. And the training instructors must evaluate and document a driver trainee's proficiency and behind the wheel skills in accordance with the units that are being taught. And proficiency is defined as repeated demonstrations of satisfactory performance. You know, they can't be one and done. They can't get alley dock backing the first time and think they're good to go. They have to repeatedly demonstrate that they can do it, because, you know, a lot of people can get lucky once, but they need to show they can continue to do that.
Hey, Scott, we had a question in the chat. It's asking about, the question says, how about reinstatement of a license after the date? I think this came in when you were talking about the learning permit, and if a driver had the CLP prior to February 7th.
So if whoever asked that question, go ahead and speak up if you want. Yeah, so the commercial learner's permit, as long as they obtain that learner's permit February 6th or prior to that date, they do not need to go through this certified training, provided that learner's permit does not expire and they complete training before that expiration date.
I probably jumped in a little bit earlier on the question, but I was kind of wondering maybe if they had already had a CDL and then had it revoked or possibly suspended. At that point, if they have to have a reinstatement, do they have to go back through the process again for the new reinstatement, or does it depend on the situation for revulsion, or like if they decided to drop it, let's say, they have to go back through the program again?
So you can jump in too, Chris. The way
I just responded to Jamie in the chat. I think it's a great question. I am not entirely sure that's an unusual situation. However, I would suspect that driver would have to go through ELDT. They're kind of funny about when you get your license pulled. What are you talking about, the situation where they got the license pulled?
Well, there's many different situations, and I guess it's kind of just a blanket statement, but you know, drivers can go in and drop their licenses because they don't have medical cards. And so then they have to go back through the reinstatement process if they get a medical card. So if there's that case, does it change things? Or if they're in an accident, let's say they lose their license due to having too many accidents, as they come back on as a driver, or later on they come back on as a driver, do they have to go through the same process for the reinstatement? Or if it was a DUI, you know, there's so many things that surround all those different questions, obviously, but.
Right. From what I understand, if I just went through getting my physical renewed, we're talking less than a week before its expiration date. If my physical had expired, I would have 6 months. I would still be able to keep that A classification. DMV would not drop me. However, I would not be eligible to drive, a commercial vehicle. If I got my physical reinstated, let's say, past the physical within that 6 months of the original expiration date, it would be great. I would just be upgraded again, automatically upgraded, because I would have been automatically downgraded to a Class D. However, So I would imagine a suspension would be the same thing, but a revocation would more than likely require going through the ELDT again. And then Larry put something there. If they complete the training and fail the CDL exam. Oh, that's
Thank you.
another question. Never mind.
Jamie, I will follow up. We have a contact in FMCSA. The way I understand it's what Chris said. If it's revoked or they let their license expire or drop it and come back, they would have to go through the ELDT training again. But if it's suspended, I don't believe they have to go through that training again. But I will follow up with our FMCSA contact and I will send the email out with that response.
Okay, yeah, I was just kind of wondering, find that gray area, if you're better off to be suspended or you're better off just to walk away and come back. So,
Okay. And
thank
yep, I see.
And while you're on that suspension, is a 2-year start as soon as they get their license back?
So you're talking about the instructor? Yes. So if they're licensed, if they're an instructor and their license is suspended for whatever reason, then they get that license back. Then they can't teach for 2 years from reinstatement of the license.
Okay.
And again, that suspension would be for one of those defined discrepancies that's in the regulation. Drunk driving, cell phone use, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so there's another question just came in. If they complete all of the ELDT training and fail the CDL exam at the state driver's licensing agency, or it could be a third-party examiner, do they retake training or can they test 2 additional times on the original training? After 3 fails, do they retake the training? That is not, there's no minimum attempts that are specified in the ELDT regulation. Once they've completed their training, if they successfully pass the training, you upload those documents to the system. And as far as FMCSA is concerned, they've successfully passed. Now they can go test. Now your state may have more strict requirements, but we will, I will look into that one too. But that may be on a state-by-state case.
Yeah, and Scott, just another thought on that is we talked earlier, or I think Matt had talked about the possibility of an audit by FMCSA into a training provider. That's something that they would look at. FMCSA would look at how many times trainees fail the behind the wheel tests and such a motor vehicle. And if they were to find a particular training provider has a real high failure rate, they might then come into that school or that training provider and audit their practices.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. That's actually the upcoming slide.
Oh,
So moving on, when it comes to the training certification, you know, as we're just actually talking about, once a driver trainee completes the training, as a training provider, you must electronically transmit that certification information to the TPR by midnight of the 2nd business day after they complete their training. And you must submit the driver trainee's name, driver's license number, the class of commercial driver's license in the state that they are trained in. You also must, if there's any endorsements, you must include that, what type of training they completed. The total number of clock hours the driver trainee spent behind the wheel. So remember, we talked about there's no minimum hours required. However, you're still going to have to document their hours behind the wheel, both on the range and on the public roadway, because that is necessary to submit for each driver trainee. Reason being, while there's no minimum hours now, in the future, that could be an update to the regulation. You know, I'm sure after a few years, they're going to look at crash data and look at the number of hours people are being trained and compare that to the crashes. And if they see that the majority of crashes happen with people with very few training hours behind the wheel, they may update that regulation to require a minimum number of hours. You also have to put your name of the training provider and your unique TPR number when you upload that information, as well as the date that they successfully completed training. And so you also, to stay continually listed on that TPR, you must continue to meet the requirements of that regulation. Every 2 years, you need to resubmit a new training provider registry form. And any changes to key information, you have to report within 30 days to FMCSA. And key information is defined as a training provider name, an address change, your phone number change, if you change the type of training that you're offering, your status, and if there's any change in state licensing and certification, you have to report that within 30 days. And that's done by electronically submitting an updated registration form to the TPR site. You also have to maintain the documentation of your state licensing, registration, certification, verifying that you're authorized to provide training in that state. You have to allow an audit or an investigation by FMCSA if requested, and you have to ensure that all documentation is available to FMCSA, and if it's requested, you must submit that within 48 hours of FMCSA's request. So removal from the training provider registry, there's some things to consider. FMCSA may remove a training provider if they fail to meet or maintain any of the qualifications established in the regulation or any state or other federal regulations. If they remove you from the training provider registry, any training conducted after that date will be considered invalid. And some factors that they may consider for removing training providers, not limited to, but these are some of the major factors. You fail to comply with the requirements for continued listing. You deny an audit or investigation. You don't turn over your documents that are requested. Or as Chris was talking about, they'll look at testing and the passage rates. So if you're passing all of your students coming through and they see that everybody is failing at the state driver's licensing agency, well, they're going to take a look at that and be like, well, they're passing, but now they're failing it when they go to get their test. There might be something going on there. And any type of, if you falsely claim or self-certify any of the factors or the things in the registration, or instances of fraud or other criminal behavior by the training provider, they can remove you from that registry. When it comes to documentation and record retention, the self-certifications, everything that has to be documented must be retained. A copy of the driver trainee's commercial learner's permit or license has to be kept in your file. All qualification documentation for your instructors and their training experience must be kept on file. That registration form that's submitted to the TPR must be kept, as well as all lesson plans for your theory and behind the range training must be kept on file, and records of individual training assessments. So all of the tests that you administer or quizzes that you administer to your driver trainees, those must be kept on file as well, either electronically or paper copies. So you must keep all of these documents for a minimum of 3 years from the date each required record is generated, unless, let's say, an instructor's license has expired or been canceled or upgraded, then that most recent one should be replaced. And the provisions of this part do not affect the training provider's obligation to comply with any other local, state, or federal requirements prescribing longer retention periods. So this regulation says 3 years, but if your state says you need to keep them for 7 years, then you have to keep them for 7 years. And part of this, we put together this nice flow chart here that will help you on that process of registering on the training provider registry for the first time, or for your every 2-year re-registration. So this is available on the Clear Road site. It's a nice flow chart that takes you through each of the steps to make sure you meet all of the requirements of the regulation. So before we move on, does anybody have any questions up to this point?
I see one other question, Scott. Military driving count towards towards 2 years?
So the way I understand it, yes. So you were talking about driving experience to be an instructor. If they drove in the military and they have that documentation that they were a commercial motor vehicle operator in the military, that would count as long as it's the same class.
Scott, I have a question on, so every person that gets behind a wheel and trains, like does OJT with the new drivers, they have to be certified through this system and to be put on a list?
No, so your instructors don't go on any kind of list. The certifying is basically you as the agency self-certifies that your instructors meet that regulation.
Okay.
So just the requirements we discussed. So either they have they have to have that same class of license or higher. So either
Right. We all have a class a class A CDLs with
Yep.
tanker endorsements.
Yep. So a class A holder could teach class A or class B, but not vice versa. Class B wouldn't be able to teach class A. So they have a license.
But the person that's doing the behind the wheel training, taking them out, you know, letting them drive on the road that's with them, do they have to be certified and on any list?
No, they're not on a list. You're just self-certifying that they meet the requirement.
Okay.
Can I just jump in there? And maybe this add a little clarification. Your instructor list does not have to be uploaded into the training provider registry. However, you as a training provider must maintain documentation on each of your individual instructors, whether they be behind the wheel or theory, that they meet these qualifications. In other words, in the private sector, there's something called a driver qualification file, in which every driver for a particular motor carrier, they would have their driving record, all the documentation that they meet the qualifications. Okay, so you would need to have that for each one kept on site, but not uploaded to the federal government.
Okay.
So
thank you.
I want to jump on with Kurt real quick just to verify for my name is Keith from the New York State Thruway Authority. We have trainers, but the trainers do not have access to computers. So what we are going to do is have our highway supervisors who oversee all our training, whether it's driving or maintenance, and we're going to have those supervisors registered, and then the trainers will document, do the assessment forms, and when they feel that the trainee is ready, we'll have the supervisors then register them on the website. Does that sound about correct?
So you're talking about registering your trainers?
We're going to register our highway supervisors who oversee our trainers. Our highway supervisors oversee all our training, whether it's, you know, operation of any type of equipment. They sign off when a training completes it. So what we are going to do is register the supervisors, have the trainers train the drivers as long as the trainers meet the qualifications of the 2 years, et cetera, and then have the registered supervisors of that unit sign off that the trainee has completed at 80% knowledge.
Okay,
So-
so
Are you saying that you're going to have your supervisors registered as training providers?
Right, like we
Okay.
registered one person as the main administrator training provider, and then we were going to have supervisors oversee the training and then sign off when a trainee completes their 80% knowledge and takes the tests. You know, that's what we were looking to do.
Have you done this already? Have you uploaded that information into the TPR?
We uploaded the administrator and we uploaded all the training locations. We haven't done the supervisors yet. We haven't registered any of the supervisors. Like I said, we were going to do the trainers, but they don't have access to computers, and they really don't document the training per file, which the supervisors do.
So I think you're fine. From our access to the TPR, once you're in the system, you know, you don't have to individually register each person. You're registering your location that you're a training provider, and then it's up to you to self-certify your instructors meet those requirements. And as Chris said, you need to keep the documentation on file, like their license class and expiration and endorsements, things like that. But it sounds like you're probably fine doing it that way.
Okay, no, I appreciate that.
Let me see, I think there's another question. Will there be any training or instructions available on the use of training provider registry data entry system prior to the system opening? So you can enter or upload the data in two ways. You can do it on an individual basis. So for those that have small throughput, like maybe you're only doing 1 or 2 drivers a month, you can just log into your training provider registry account and just upload that information, upload those documents. but they do have a web portal that allows you to batch process and batch upload all of your trainees' data. So let's say you have larger classes and you're putting 20 or 25 driver trainees through every other month. They have a web portal that allows you to batch process that data. We can send out that link. They have a link with a little training manual, but that involves getting your IT department. They have to set up the back end of that so it can have seamless access. So just reach out to us individually. You can email me from the invite to this webinar, and we can send you the link to that information. And then I have another question. It says, let me see. I'm an employee for the state of Vermont holding a Class A pintle hook restriction. My general manager would like me to be a trainer. Would I have to go through this training myself if I'm upgrading to a Class A unrestricted? So it sounds like you already have a Class A with the pintle hook restriction. You would have to just go to the DMV after you've trained successfully on the fifth wheel and take the test. You do not have to go through the entry-level driver training to upgrade. And I think that's the end of the questions for now. So if there's no other questions, we'll move on to the next section here, and I'll pass it on to Matt.
All right, thanks, Scott. So first we'll talk a little bit about the training structure and the sequence of that training. So Scott's already talked a little bit about some of this stuff, but a Class A CDL applicant must complete the Class A CDL curriculum as it's specified in the regulation. We'll talk specifically what those required topics and sections are in just a little bit. Class B would go through the Class B curriculum. They're very similar, and we'll talk about the differences here in a little bit. One other thing to point out, and I think Scott mentioned this too, is that there is no minimum number of hours required under the ELDT regulations. That applies to the theory stuff and the behind the wheel stuff. It's not minimum hours based. It's based on proficiency, which Scott mentioned. But with that said, you have to make sure that the training instructor covers each of the topics set forth in the curriculum as specified by FMCSA. Something else to note is behind the wheel training must be conducted in the CMV for which that person's applying for. So as Scott mentioned, if the person's going for a Class A CDL, they must be trained on the behind the wheel using a Class A vehicle. Same for a Class B. And the instructor must determine and document that each driver training has demonstrated that proficiency in each of those elements, right? And again, it's not a one and done, it's the proficiency. You need to make sure they can do it over and over again in order to say that they meet those requirements. And again, we'll talk about each of those skills on the range and on the road in just a minute. And then also consistent with the definitions and the range and public road training, simulation devices can't be used. So we do know that some state agencies definitely utilize a simulator to help their drivers be trained, and that's great. Simulators are allowed, but with that said, you can't use the simulator for the behind the wheel portion, right? You can't use the simulator to document proficiency in those skills. With that said, certainly during the theory or the classroom part, if you want to incorporate a simulator somehow into that, that's perfectly allowable. You just can't use it for that behind the wheel time. So the good news is that the training curriculum that we put together for Clear Roads is 100% compliant with the ELDT regulations. So that means you can go to the Clear Roads website, you can download the curriculum that we put together, and you're going to be set. You don't have to come up with stuff yourself. Now, with that said, the one caveat is Each state may have specific or more stringent requirements than the federal government. We do have placeholder slides in our PowerPoint presentations for you to add state-specific requirements or regulations that are related to that topic. We also left slides if your state agency or municipality has certain policies related to various aspects. You can add that information in as well. So because FMCSA is very clear on the topics that must be covered, you as a certified training provider must self-certify that your curriculum meets those training requirements, right? So that you are actually doing what is required. So if you use ClearRoads, you're set to meet that. So as Scott mentioned, the ClearRoads CLDT or ELDT training curriculum is divided into the two parts, the theory or classroom and the behind the wheel components. Now, these two training components may be delivered back to back, depending on your specific agency or your specific district. But they don't have to be necessarily administered back to back. They could also be administered simultaneously. So for example, you could do classroom training in the morning, take those driver trainees outside and do some behind the wheel in the afternoon. Or you could vary days, right? So Monday, Tuesday, do the classroom, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Thursday, Friday, do behind the wheel. Or you could do the entire classroom portion online, that's allowed. Or you could do both the behind the wheel and the classroom portion face to face. The only thing to think about is that the behind the wheel cannot happen before that individual has taken or started taking that training, right? So it can be done at the same time, but the behind the wheel cannot happen first. And this kind of makes sense because a lot of the theory instruction is what is required for that driver to have that commercial license permit, right? The person has to have that permit in order to do the behind the wheel stuff. So it kind of makes sense. So as I mentioned, the curriculums for the Class A are very similar. In fact, it's only one module that's different. We have labeled the modules in the ClearRoads program as Class A/B or just Class A in the title. So you hopefully can see the difference pretty clearly when you go and look at those PowerPoint modules. And then just to simplify the training material, ClearRoads provides the one theory and one the behind the wheel curriculum that works for both. The only thing that's different is the module on coupling and uncoupling, right? So that's omitted for the Class B, but it is needed for the Class A. As the instructors are going through those materials, the instructor should emphasize the class that they're training on, whether that's the Class A or the Class B, and give examples for that type of vehicle. With that said, you may potentially have some students who are trying to get their Class B and some students who are trying to get their Class A. And they can be in the same class together. You don't have to have separate classes for the Class A folks. You don't need a separate class for the Class B folks. They can take it together. There's nothing in the ELDT regulation that limits that or really talks about that. So we do know, and we got a lot of feedback from ClearRoads agencies as we were developing this curriculum. Some of these modules and some of the concepts and topics that are now required under the ELDT regulation may not necessarily apply to you in your state agency. We know that you guys are exempt from some of these things, right? A lot of times you are exempt from having an ELD, an electronic logging device in your vehicle because for the most part, a lot of state agencies are not going outside that 150 air mile radius. However, with that said, the ELDT regulation is what it is. You have to cover those topics. So just because you don't have to have ELDTs or your drivers do not have to fill out logbooks, you still have to cover that information. You still have to cover the medical card, the medical requirements. You still have to cover whistleblower protection, which is another topic that you may not have been training on previously. This is what's in the regulation. So to be compliant, you have to at least cover it. So because of that, a lot of times your trainers may not necessarily know or be really up to speed with all of these new things. So we encourage all the trainers who will be delivering this training content to go and do some research beforehand, make sure that they're familiar with all that content before talking with the driver trainees. We also have hazardous material endorsement training as part of the Clear Roads curriculum. So as you can imagine, the ELDT also includes specific information for all the endorsements, including hazardous materials, which we know a lot of agencies do deal with on a somewhat limited basis. So similar to all the other ELDT stuff, if you have a driver who's going to get that hazmat endorsement, they need to complete the required training before the DMV or the state driver's license agency will allow that individual to take that written test. One thing to note is that there is not, behind the wheel, such section for the hazmat driver trainee. It's just the theory or classroom portion. So again, similar to all the other stuff, the Clear Roads program we put together is compliant with the ELDT regulation as it applies to the hazmat endorsement. So again, if you use what we put together, you're going to be good to go. You don't have to develop anything else. The one other thing that we have gotten a lot of questions on is a tanker endorsement. The new ELDT regulations does not require formal training for that tanker endorsement. Therefore, throughout multiple of the modules, we talk about tanker training, and it may be conducted, as you have in the past. And it's not specifically called out and addressed in the Clear Roads program, but we do talk about it in several modules. So the curriculum structure, the theory curriculum or the classroom curriculum consists of 5 separate sections. Within each of these sections, there are several units of instruction. Some of the sections have as few as 3 units. Some have as many as 10 plus. And these theory sections cover both information on driving, on the vehicle, and non-driving topics. The behind the wheel portion, on the other hand, consists of 2 sections, as Scott mentioned. And then within each of these sections, there are several units of instruction or several skills that you need to make sure you cover. So the behind the wheel, as Scott mentioned, is including the range or the kind of the parking lot task and the public road training. The Clear Roads training we put together, the sections and units are numbered in the exact same order, in the same manner as the Federal Motor Carrier Safety regulations say. So it's easy for you guys to cross-reference that to make sure that what you're covering meets those minimum standards. We also have a syllabi for each of the units. Each theory and behind the wheel section does have a syllabus. This really helps document what the driver trainees are going to be learning. It talks about and gives an idea on how many hours that unit may take, or that section may take. And then, so the actual syllabi, there's 5 of them, 1 for each of those sections, and there's 2 for the behind the wheel stuff. It also gives some information on how you can evaluate the driver trainees.
It should be recording.
All right, perfect. So the syllabi are more for the overall sections. As I mentioned before, each section has the individual units. So each unit will have a lesson plan. So the lesson plan is really nailing down specifically what's included in that module. So the overview, the objectives, any materials that may be needed outside the CDL manual. It also goes into detail on the essential learning questions. This helps guide the content. It helps the driver trainees know what's going to be covered. It also talks about the procedure and the assessment. And lesson plans are a required record for the ELDT compliance. So again, this could just go in your files at your training facility. Just make sure you document exactly what's going to be covered. So,
Okay, it's on.
all right. Sorry about that, folks. So in addition to the lesson plans, the Clear Roads curriculum is PowerPoint based. This is good because you guys can go and update information based on your state or based on your agency. It's easy to implement either in person or online. Also, each of these PowerPoints could be uploaded into your learning management system if your state does have that. So we have the PowerPoint presentations for all the instructional units in the theory section. It's covering all those topics. It's going to help the instructor stay on track. We do have suggested narrations in the notes section of that training, just in case a training provider would like some ideas on what that slide was intended to cover. It also helps the trainees stay on focus. At the end of the PowerPoint presentations, we do have summative assessments. So in other words, at the end of that section, some of all the information we talked about, there are questions that you can have your driver trainees take just to make sure they understand the content. Make sure they get it, make sure they learn what they were supposed to. And you can use this as that assessment that Scott mentioned. So make sure your students can answer 80% of those questions correctly. But in addition to that, throughout each of the PowerPoint presentations, we do have periodic formative assessments. In other words, kind of just checks. You know, are those driver trainees still engaged? Are they listening? Are they getting that content as you're talking about it? So it's just a way to kind of break up that information. It's a good or best practice in terms of education to give the students a break and to periodically check in on them. So as I just mentioned, well, as Scott mentioned, first, you have to test the driver trainees and make sure that they can answer 80% of the content or the questions correctly. So what we recommend is that you have the summative assessment at the end of each unit, instead of doing it in a larger scale after each section, or even worse, you know, after all the content has been covered. This will help, help those students because the content's going to be kind of fresh in their mind. It's kind of setting them up for success. We do have an answer key for that summative assessment. It's located in the lecture notes in the PowerPoints. Again, we recommend doing this at the end of the units, but you can do it at other times. If you would like to do a larger test, after each of those 5 sections, or one final test at the very end, that's allowed. FMCSA is giving you the flexibility to determine what's best, but we do recommend it at the end of each of those units. We also have an Excel spreadsheet, just in case if you like to use that to help track trainee progress and to document and keep a record, which is required. You need to keep that record of the driver trainees pass rates on all of those assessments. Now, in terms of behind the wheel training, our curriculum provides detailed and sequenced written lesson plans for both the range and the public road units. We have some suggested dialogue that you could use in the truck and on the reins as you're going through that information. We have materials for recording progress as each of the trainees are going through those skills, so you can help to document and back up whether you're saying a driver trainee can demonstrate proficiency. All right, so what, we talked about these units. So what are they? The first overall section in the theory part of the ELDT regulation is just basic operation of that commercial motor vehicle. So section 1 is orientation. And really this is just giving those driver trainees an overview of what the regulation is. It goes into a little bit of detail on specific regulations that apply to a professional driver. It talks about driver responsibilities, and really it's hoping and trying to make sure those driver trainees understand that they are being trained to be professional CDL drivers. The second unit is on the control systems in the dash in that CMV. So this is just talking about the instrument panel, the controls of the vehicle, steering, shifting, braking, things like that. Third unit is on pre and post trip inspections, really what they are, what needs to be covered in those inspections, and how to do them. Basically, it's talking about what they will be tested on when they go get their CDL and what the inspectors are going to be looking for. Section 4 is a basic control. So really just talking about and giving an intro to the basic operational control of the heavy vehicle, you know, turning, centering, maneuvering, entering, exiting highways, things like that. Unit 5 is shifting. So, you know, how teaching those drivers how to safely shift their vehicle. Backing and docking, it's pretty self-explanatory, talking about safely backing a heavy vehicle. And then unit 7 here, you can see is the one unit that's different between the class A and class B. It's talking about coupling and uncoupling. So if you only have drivers getting their class B, you do not need to do this unit. However, if you do have drivers getting that class A, you'll need to cover this as well. And just to note, as Scott mentioned, the vast majority of you guys and the vast majority of Clear Roads agencies do operate that dump truck pintle hook setup. So we have focused on that with our training, although we do talk a little bit about the fifth wheel as well. The second section is safe operating procedures. This gets into more detail on how that driver is going to be safely operating, and the skills they need and information they need to safely operate that vehicle on the road. So the first unit is on visual search. So really talking about the importance and best practices for searching the environment, searching the area around the vehicle. Second unit is on communication, and this is really communicating with other road users. So, you know, your lighting, your turn signals, using your horn, things like that. The third unit in this section is on distracted driving. Discusses the dangers of distracted driving, the regulations related to commercial motor vehicle drivers, and the types of distraction. Next is speed management. So it's just going over content and information about how drivers can manage their speed effectively. Does start to touch on information on how weather or weight or length of that vehicle impacts their speed. Space management is pretty self-explanatory, talking about strategies to manage the space around their vehicle to keep them safe to avoid crashes. Night operations, specifically talking about nighttime driving, right? And special considerations needed for that driver to know when they are driving at night. And then the extreme driving conditions is going over the special considerations for driving in snow and ice, driving in fog, driving in extreme heat, driving in rain, heavy rains, going down steep grades or sharp curves. And then section 3 goes into much more detailed information beyond kind of those basic safe practices. So the first one's hazard perception, teaching the drivers how to do visual searches in more detail, how to recognize potential hazards that may become a conflict, anticipating things happening and responding to hazards. The second unit in this section is on skid control, recovery, jackknifing, other emergencies. So this is really just talking about directional control of the vehicle, loss of control events, slippery conditions, emergency braking, and other types of evasive maneuvers that the driver needs to know how to do. And then finally, the third unit here is railroad high grade crossings. talking about what they are, important considerations about them, what to do if they get stuck, clearance requirements, regulations related to the grade crossings, when they have to stop, what best practices that driver should do before crossing the railroad. The fourth section is vehicle systems and reporting malfunctions. So this is just talking about, identifying and diagnosing the malfunctions, not necessarily, of course, doing the maintenance on that, but how to identify issues to help keep that vehicle safe. Roadside inspections, really this is talking about how to interact or what to expect during a roadside inspection, any penalties or common out of service criteria and issues that we see on the roads. And then finally is looking at maintenance. So this is kind of basic maintenance of that vehicle. And then finally, the last section is non-driving activities. These are a lot of the things that you guys may not have been training on previously that you need, or you may want to make sure your trainers are up to speed on. The first one, handling and documenting cargo. You guys probably have been doing this, but it's really just focusing on how that driver needs to go out and make sure their cargo is secured safely so it's not going to fall off. Next one is environmental compliance issues. So really just talking about recognizing environmental issues that could be related to that CMV, recognizing hazards and what to do if an environmental issue does come up. Section 3 is our service requirements. So it's really going over the regulations. What are those limits? The 11 and 14-hour rules, the weekly driving limits for drivers, the short haul exemptions, and how that driver and going over the logbook requirements to make sure the driver knows how to fill out a logbook. The fourth one is fatigue, wellness awareness, going over the importance and the dangers of driving while tired, giving some insight into what to look out for, helping drivers self-assess fatigue to help keep them safe going down the road. Fifth section, or the fifth unit, is post-crash procedures. So basically what that driver needs to know if a crash does occur. External communications, this is really focused on how that driver needs to interact with a law enforcement officer. Whistleblower and coercion, just basically if you see something, say something, the protections that driver has as an employee. Trip planning, this is something, again, you guys probably, or your drivers probably won't be doing, but it is required. So talking about the importance of planning a trip and routes, talking about rest spots, heavy traffic, grade crossing, things like that. Drug and alcohol requirements, going over the regulations, what happens, the drug testing and alcohol testing requirements. And then finally, the medical requirements for CMVs. The first part of behind the wheel is the range. As you can see here, there are 7 separate skills and topics that need to be covered. One of those is the last one, the coupling and uncoupling. So again, that only applies to those Class A drivers. But in the range, you need to go out and make sure those drivers can do the pre-trip, in-route, and post-trip inspection. So teaching those drivers hands-on what to do, what to look for, how to do it. Talking about straight line backing, alley docking, offset backing, parallel parking, both on the blind side and the sight side. And then on the road, so the behind the wheel public road portion is really a culmination of everything that's been discussed in the classroom, right? Making sure that they know what they're doing, they can do it when they're actually behind the wheel. So going over the vehicle controls, going over the shifting transmissions, communicating with other road users, using their signals appropriately. Can that driver demonstrate that they know how to and can visually search, look for hazards on the road? Can they demonstrate that they can manage their speed and space safely and correctly? Can they demonstrate that they are performing the safe driver behaviors? Can they demonstrate filling out a logbook every day when they're going out and doing this training? Can they demonstrate proper hazard perception, recognition, anticipation? Does need to talk about grade crossings, night operations, extreme driving conditions, skid control, recovery, jackknifing, and other emergencies. So with that, I know that was a lot of information, really diving into what the content is. Happy to answer any questions.
This is Kevin from Colorado DOT. On slide 50, where you cover the non-driving activities for the theory, I got a question from one of our testers about this. And if we have someone upgrading from a B to an A, he was under the impression that we could skip these units if they're upgrading.
If I jump in there, not all of them, they still have to go and do unit, well, out of service, hours of service rather, and fatigue and wellness awareness. The rest, I believe, do not have to be included. Okay, so they would only still have to do just those two if they're going from a B to A.
So dot 3 and dot 4.
Dot 3 and dot 4.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome. If I could just jump in there, I saw there were several questions that were very similar that came up in the chat, and I want to make sure everyone understands this. An instructor does not register with FMCSA, only the training provider. So questions about third-party examiners, or there was a few others that were similar to that. A third-party examiner, I'm certain, is registered or has to be authorized by the state licensing agency in order to perform that function. However, if they are your employee and they're also an instructor, they're not registering, but you would still need to keep that, I'll just call it instructor qualification file in case of an audit. You got to be able to prove that this person you're using to instruct, whether it be theory or behind the wheel, meets the regulation or meets the qualification. So you got to have that on hand, because if the feds want it, you got 48 hours to give it up. So you got to keep the file. So I hope that adds to the clarification, the difference between the training provider and and an instructor. The training provider is the entity. That's your Del Dot, that's your Arizona Dot, that's your highway administration. The instructor is the actual employee. They do not need to be registered, but you have to document their qualifications and keep that on file. That help? Hope.
Any other questions before we take our 15-minute break?
Yeah, when they come to failing the theory section, you're saying we could give that test as many times as we feel necessary to pass? It's up to our judgment call?
There's nothing in the regulations that I'm aware of that says they have to pass it the first time, the second time with you. Okay, so you're going to be assessing them in theory, perhaps after each individual unit. Remember, there's 30 of them total,
Right.
5 sections with each of a number of units under there. So you test them. If someone failed it, that's up to you whether you want to go and maybe give them a remedial assignment, and then that they need to complete before you let them retest, which is probably a pretty good idea. But you could let them retest it over and over and over again. However, they are your employee, and if they're not getting it, maybe they shouldn't be in that job. So that's entirely your decision as an employer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll resume with the theory instruction, train the trainer module.
Thanks, Scott. See you back at 12:15.
All right.
Okay, we're back on live. All right, hey everybody, glad you've made it back. There was a great question that came in during the break. Somebody asked, is this the same webinar we saw back in December? And it was like, yes, a few additional insights. Scott and Matt have researched a few things. So another opportunity to go and ask additional questions. So, and besides, everyone loves a good rerun, don't they? So anyway, okay, so we're going to talk about theory instruction for the entry-level driver training curriculum. As I said, I've got a lot of experience teaching at Delaware Tech, both classroom and behind the wheel. So I'm going to do my best to help you out here. All right, just an overview of this training module. We're going to talk again. This is this redundancy that Scott had talked about. I'll try not to belabor it too much. We're going to talk about the theory, instructor qualifications, facilities, classroom requirements. Again, an overview of the curriculum structure that Matt went over very well. We're going to talk about lesson plans, how to use them. I'm going to talk about PowerPoint presentations, how to use them in theory instruction. And I'll give a few classroom management insights, some teaching tips. I'll talk about assessment and record keeping, which is really important, how to keep your records as part of the normal operations of teaching. And we're going to talk about the submission of training records to the training provider registry. All right, so some of these major provisions, again, a training provider, again, that's the entity that you work for, not you as an instructor, but the training provider as defined is that entity that is registered with FMCSA. All right, so you must provide instruction in a curriculum that meets this rule. There is no gray area there. It's got to meet the rule. Eligibility requirements, you must meet those eligibility requirements to be listed on the TPR as a training provider. You're going to have to attest that you meet the requirements under the penalty of perjury, all right? And you're going to have to supply records. So it means you're going to have to keep records and documentation in case of that FMCSA audit. And incidentally, my time with Professional Truck Driver Institute, I perform voluntary audits on many schools. So I've got a pretty good idea of what they would be looking for and how an audit is performed. So theory instruction, that definition again is knowledge instruction, thought of classroom instruction. Also, you could consider it lab. Matt had talked about the use of simulators. Simulators are not to be counted as far as hours towards behind the wheel instruction. They can be used. It's encouraged that they're used. I did a great study with Virginia Tech on the use of simulators in tractor trailer driver training for a 5-year period. It was fabulous. They are very effective, but you just can't count the hours in that simulator towards behind the wheel hours when you report that up through the TPR. So again, it's knowledge instruction in the operation of a CMV and related matters. There's your sections 4 and 5 using lectures, demonstrations, audiovisual, computer-based instruction, simulators, as I said, online training or similar means. Okay, that theory instructor, right? This is the one that's going to provide that classroom instruction, that lab instruction, perhaps. In the operation of that CMV, has to have one of these 2 qualifications, right? We went over this before. You got to have that CDL of that same classification plus 2 years driving experience, and then meets any particular state requirements for a CMV instructor. Or you have to have that CDL, same class, and 2 years experience as a CMV instructor. And of course, you still have to meet any individual requirements of your state. You can't be prohibited from engaging in theory instruction for 2 years if your CDL has been canceled, suspended, or revoked for any of the disqualifying offenses that's listed in CFR 383.51. All right. Some exceptions, okay? You're not required to hold that CDL of the same classification or higher. if that instructor previously held it. So I see that as kind of maybe a little tricky thing. How are you going to find out if somebody, if he's especially a new individual, new hire, if they actually had 2 years experience driving a truck, if they don't have a record to show that? So they would have to provide some sort of documentation that they have been employed as a driver in years past, perhaps. Okay. And again, if it's online content only, you still have to meet the qualifications of the licensing experience, so forth like that, but you just don't have to meet the state requirements for theory instructors. That would be, I think, an unnecessary burden to have to prove that you meet the requirements of all 50 states and territories. Training provider means an entity that's listed on the FMCSA training provider registry, as I stated earlier. Training providers include everything from schools, educational institutes, business cooperatives, motor carriers, state and local government, school districts, joint labor management programs, right, owner operators, or individuals such as myself. I could actually list myself as a training provider and provide online training for any of the theory elements. Okay. Facilities, right? And basically, your facilities have to comply with all applicable state, federal, local statutes. Basically, clean and comfortable, proper restrooms, proper lighting, furnishings, have heat, air conditioning, enough elbow room for your students, desks, things like that. So common sense stuff. Classroom lab instruction. Again, there is no minimum hours on theory units. Okay, however, all instruction in the required elements must be provided. So everything in there, we'll talk about lesson plans. You follow the lesson plans, you follow the PowerPoint, and you're going to cover all of those necessary elements with the Clear Roads curriculum. It's going to require comprehensive testing / assessment. And when we come to the theory, an 80% minimum passing rate is required. So there is that paper test or that question and answer testing that's going to be necessary. We give suggested timeframes for lessons, but somebody else asked the question, would let's say two different students in the same training, would they have to have the same amount of time? No, one might get through it faster than others. Or perhaps if you're training on all automatic equipment, automatic transmissions, you're not going to have to spend nearly as much time in theory or behind the wheel when it comes to shifting that vehicle as you would if it was a non-synchronized manual transmission. Okay, so the structure of the sequence, again, fully compliant with the ELDT regulation. You're going to have to go and, each site is going to have to use that curriculum in accordance with the regulations, Class A, Class B, or hazmat. As we said in some of the questions, or answered one of the questions, someone wants to get upgrade to a passenger. Well, that does require ELDT training. However, that's not part of the Clear Roads commitment or the Virginia Tech commitment to Clear Roads. We just handled Class A, B, and hazmat. Since the entry-level driver training curricula for A and B are nearly identical, we've just done one that works for both, basically. Just a few annotations, such as Matt had said, the coupling and uncoupling is not necessary for B, but it is for A. However, some B vehicles, right? B vehicles, if you're aware of this, if you're pulling a trailer that's rated at 10,000 or less, you can still do it with a B. And I think you're going to want to train them on the use of that equipment anyway, even though it's not required. Again, if you're teaching Class B, obviously you're going to tailor that a little bit to that type of equipment, even though, and with an A, you would tailor your presentation for Class A type equipment. Again, you can teach A and B students together. However, you're going to have to go and specify this is for A, this is for B. Again, I think it's pretty common sense. Again, it is understood, as Matt said, that some of the federal, state, local government agencies are exempt from certain FMCSR requirements, such as DOT physicals and hours of service, commonly known as logbooks. They must be taught, though. That's the regulation. We have to do it. So you're going to be encouraged to research and become familiar with these instructional topics that you might not be familiar with. And also, if I could just go and throw a little tip out there, be very positive about it. You can relay that to the students or to your trainees that although this isn't required, this is a good thing to know. And I'll talk more about that later, particularly when we start talking about the hours of service bit. Go ahead. The theory curriculum, again, is 5 sections, and then each has a number of units under that. And I'm being very clear to that I'm keeping myself straight. Sections are the big groupings, 5 of them in the theory, and each has multiple units underneath them. Okay. Behind the wheel curriculum, 2 sections, each of which have multiple units of instruction. And behind the wheel sections are the range and the public road that we'll get into in the next module. And we've numbered them so that they go and basically are the same as the regulation. So if you want to cross-reference and see just what does the regulation say about this unit that I'm teaching, it'd be easy to look it up. Okay, so we said sections, 5 sections in the theory, 2 in the behind the wheel. They each have a syllabus. A syllabus is a document that you should provide to each trainee at the beginning of that section. It's going to give a basic idea of what is going to be taught within that section or in the units within that section. It's going to have descriptions. It's going to talk about any textbooks or manuals that you're going to require. If you could all mute, make sure you're muted, please. You get a lot of background feed. Okay, cool. Again, that syllabus is going to, you should have it printed out paper-wise, give it to the each trainee. This lets them know what's going to be covered within that section and the individual units within that, textbooks, manuals, whether the method of instruction, whether it's theory, whether it's going to be online, so forth like that, or if it's face-to-face classroom, behind the wheel, and so forth. It's going to have the objectives and measurable objectives. Measurable objectives, in teacher talk, that's what we're going to test you on. It'll have evaluation criteria and grading system. So again, your section A/B 1.1 is known as basic operation. As Matt said, it has orientation, and orientation really covers quite a lot. So it's orientation to the trucking industry and commercial driving industry. It's going to go over in section 1.2, control systems, dashboard. It's going to go over pre and post trip inspections, not just how to perform them, but what's required of various federal laws and such. The basic control of the vehicle, left turn, right turn, putting the vehicle into motion, stopping it safely and such like that. Lane changing and all that. Shifting and operating the transmissions, unit 1.5. Again, that could be a lot shorter if you're just doing automatic transmissions than if you're doing that wonderful double clutching non-synchronized transmission. Backing and docking. And then, of course, your coupling and uncoupling required for A, but a lot of B drivers are going to be required to know how to operate a pintle hook with a lighter trailer. So section 1.2, safe operating procedures, visual search, right? Communication Speed management and space management. I did leave out distracted driving. I'll get back to that, but visual search, communication, speed, and space management are basically have been known as the 4 safe operating principles, and they're all tied very closely together. And you'll also find it like that in your CDL manual. Of course, distracted driving will be covered. And in addition to the penalties for distracted driving, cell phone use, and such like that while operating a commercial vehicle, that is a disqualifying offense, incidentally. Extreme driving conditions also now is listed under safe operating procedures. Sections Section 1.3, advanced operating procedure, hazard perception. Obviously, that's tied in closely with visual search. Your skid control, recovery, jackknifing, and other emergencies. Obviously, that's tied in very closely with extreme driving conditions. And of course, railroad and highway grade crossings or at grade crossings. I know you know that that's a big concern. No one wants to get hit by a train. And then section 1.4, vehicle systems and reporting malfunctions, includes identification and diagnosis of malfunctions, roadside inspections, maintenance. And just on a sidebar, 4.1, identification and diagnosis of malfunctions. I know your folks that are working in your shop repairing the trucks, they really appreciate a driver that has an ability to look at the truck or to figure out that there's something wrong and write it up in such a way that it makes it easy on the tech that's got to fix it. I ran into that just on Monday with the way a previous driver had written up a discrepancy on a vehicle that said compartment number 2 needs fixing. Well, what does that mean on a gasoline tanker that compartment number 2 needs fixing? They need to be able to go and see what's wrong, figure it out, and report it so it can get repaired quickly and easily. And of course, it also includes maintenance of the vehicle from a driver perspective. 1.5 covers quite a bit. This is, again, your non-driving activities, some of which you may not have to deal with in your day-to-day operations, handling and documenting of cargo, environmental compliance issues, hours of service, requirements, fatigue and wellness. I think 5, 3, and 4, which what we talked about earlier, are required if you're upgrading from a B to an A. 1 and then 5 through 10 are not, because it would be presumed they already got that in previous training in their Class B training. Post-crash procedures, external communications. That's dealing a lot with the public and also with law enforcement, as opposed to using your turn signals and brake lights and such. Whistleblower and driver coercion, trip planning, drugs and alcohol. Everyone, you may be, your employees may be exempt from medical requirements, but they are not exempt from the drug and alcohol testing requirements of the federal regulations. So again, very good topics. All right. Hazardous material endorsement training. I mentioned earlier that I had to go through the physical recently, which is good for 2 years. I got my 2-year card. But I also had to go and get my CDL renewed, and I have a hazardous material endorsement. So I had to go and take the hazmat written test again. That's because it's only good for 5 years. So what did I do to prepare to get ready? I went through the test bank that we've provided here through Clear Roads. I studied those questions. I flew through that hazmat test in record time. So I know firsthand it works. Okay, so ELDT requires specific training for hazmat endorsement, and this has to be completed before the state licensing agency or DMV will allow that driver trainee to take the written test. Okay, there is no behind the wheel test. So we've got a hazardous material endorsement training program, lesson plans, and PowerPoint that works, and of course a test bank that's highly effective. Again, the tanker, no formal training is required for tanker endorsement. So you can just give them the CDL manual, tell them to study it, go to motor vehicle and take the tanker test to add the endorsement if that's what you require for them to do their job. All right, lesson plans. Okay. Earlier, when we were going through the definitions of training, it was stated in the definitions for both theory and behind the wheel that you need to follow the lesson plan for that day of training. That is one thing an auditor will do. If they're going to sit in and audit theory instruction or even behind the wheel instruction, they're going to say, let me see the lesson plan for today. Okay, so be rather embarrassing at least to not be teaching what the lesson plan says you're supposed to teach for that day. Okay, so we have detailed written lesson plans that are going to organize your delivery of instruction, right? Overview of lesson, time frame, which you can modify as you use this and you get more familiar with it and you figure out what works best. It's going to have your objectives, the materials. So the instructor is going to say, oh, I need to have these materials on hand to provide this lesson. Textbooks, manuals, essential learning questions, which basically are the instructional objectives rephrased in a question format that can be used for your assessment for your assessing your students, whether it be a summative or a formative. And we'll talk about that more. And you have your assignments and then what type of assessment you're going to be doing that day. And again, required for ELDT compliance. All right. Okay, so I think it's highly recommended that every instructor review that unit lesson plan before teaching a lesson, particularly when you're new in teaching this ELDT curriculum. Okay, so review that. It's going to make sure you're prepared and focused. Have a printed copy with you while teaching the lesson. I recommend that you keep a binder. In other words, so you have unit 1.1, section 1.1, and you have the unit, it's broken down with tabs perhaps, with units 1.1 through 1.7, I think, is in the first section, that you have the lesson plans there for each particular unit within that section. So it's nice and organized. It's going to make it easy for that, have that on a shelf there in the classroom. All right. So in addition to the lesson plans, we're going to have PowerPoint presentations that are going to follow the lesson plan. They're going to cover all the required theory topics. Again, it really is going to help you stay on track. It's going to help the trainees stay focused. You can always jump back to a previous slide if you need to reinforce a particular concept. They will include instructor notes down at the bottom of that page on the PowerPoint. They're going to include formative assessment discussion topics. And formative assessment can be thought of, are they getting it? You can do formative assessment very informally by just question and answering, asking students questions. We're kind of doing that here by encouraging you to raise your hand in the middle of use the chat function. That's helping us understand if you're getting the idea, and if you don't, you can go and say, hey, give me a little help here. And then the summative assessments, that's your tests or quizzes at the end. And again, I strongly recommend at the end of each unit, not one big final. I think doing it at the end of the unit is going to increase your pass rate. If you do just one final, I think you're asking for some trouble there. Um, as far as textbooks and manuals, okay, here's the good old CDL manual issued by AMVA. Excellent resource. It doesn't require all the ELDT units, but almost all. It's not going to really do you a whole lot of good in section 5 with the in section 4 or 5, the vehicle maintenance or the non-driving activities. And it's free. You can usually go to motor vehicle and they'll give you a stack of them. Okay, there are additional texts that are recommended. Another one is this is really good when it comes for vehicle inspection and when it comes to the maintenance and vehicle systems. And this is the CVSA, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, North American Out of Service Criteria. Okay, and the Federal Motor Carriers Safety Regulation. You can either get a print. This is a big one. It's got all the guidance along with the regulation, which is a really good one to maybe have one of these for the instructor. You can look up in the actual regulations online, and there are a number of really good commercially available texts. This one here is one that I particularly like, the JJ Keller. I think it's the most up to date with the regulation that I've seen. There's some other good ones such as Bumper to Bumper, or I think there's another one from Career Publishers, or Cengage rather. But I don't think they're quite as up to date as the JJ Keller. There was a question. Let's see. Okay. The last one was how many questions per unit and how do they get the test? We provided a test bank. They're also included in the on the PowerPoint. And if you got an 80%, if you got to use 10 questions, and most of them we've got 20 or more questions. But if you use a 10-question quiz, then no more than 2 wrong, 3 wrong, that's a 70%. So that's going to be up to you, but as to how many you wish to use for that, assessing that particular unit. I hope that helped there. Okay, classroom management. Really important that you as a trainer always conduct yourself in a professional manner. It has been my experience that if you get a little bit off topic, or get a little risky, let's say, perhaps with your language, it opens up the door for your trainees to not act professionally. So yes, so you always got to conduct yourself in a professional manner in the classroom, outside of the classroom, on break, driving your own personal vehicle. They see you pull out of the parking lot and drive like a maniac. That now, does my instructor really practice what he preaches? So I think that's really important. So you need to create and maintain a positive learning environment. Again, manage the conduct in your learning environment. Again, I think modeling is a great way of doing that. Lead, inspire, motivate your trainees. A lot of positive reinforcement is a very good thing. Again, we go back to assessments. If you're assessing at the end of each unit, I think you're going to have a higher success rate in each unit, and that's going to be motivating in and of itself to your trainees. Set your expectations. In your lesson plans, it has the objectives. So that is your learning expectations, but also behavioral expectations. You might have want to consider a list of basically rules for how rules of conduct for the classroom and for the behind the wheel. And also, I'm assuming that these are going to be your employees. So I'm sure HR has some behavioral expectations of the employees of your particular state agency. Effectively communicate, listen, respond to questions. And again, as you go along, you're going to need to keep accurate training records, I'm sure attendance records is going to be included. Again, state HR, I'm sure, has got requirements as to attendance at work. Okay. I was reading a question. Sorry for that. Adult learners. Okay, you're dealing with adult learners, not children. They are not going to be passive learners. You're not going to sit there and you're not going to pour the knowledge in their head. They're going to be active participants in the learning experience. And of course, so much of the training is hands-on, whether it be in the lab or behind the wheel, road or range. They're going to come with expectations of the learning environment. They're going to expect certain things from you, and out of that training, they bring their own experiences to the learning environment, and they learn best when they can process this new information to things they already know, when they can relate to it. There's a very good chance, I think, that some of their trainees are going to be coming from, let's say, lower level or non-CDL type jobs within your agency. So they're going to have some information coming in. So relate it to what they can. Relate perhaps the control systems in the truck to that of a car. They drive a car. Again, and they're going to be best motivated when they feel respected, valued, they're treated with respect, just like you, just like all of us. Be an effective communicator. Don't read straight out of the book or straight from the slideshow. Naturally, you're going to have to pay attention to what's on that slide. You're going to read it, but add something to it. Don't just make it straight from the textbook. Otherwise, what's the sense in having you there? Just read the book. Clear and concise. Avoid slang. There's a lot of slang in when it comes to trucks, but try to be consistent in that. And also across your instructors. The road instructor and the classroom instructor should use a similar terminology, let's say, similar language. Be aware of your verbal and nonverbal communication, including in not just yours, but theirs, intentional or unintentional. Very important. And we're talking by nonverbal, we're talking about everything from your tone of voice, to your facial expressions, gestures, and such. If someone asks a dumb question, don't sound like don't say what, that's not too motivating for them. Listen for and encourage feedback from driver trainees. You see that that deer in the headlight look on their face. That's telling you that they're probably not getting it. So need to question them, maybe go back a slide and reinforce that concept. Again, I hinted on this in the last slide, consistency between theory and behind the wheel curriculum. So if you're teaching shifting in the classroom, you should be aware of what's going to be required in that vehicle for that skill. So be aware of these, what the lesson plans call for in these complementary units of instruction. You've got shifting in the classroom, the lesson plan on that. There's going to be a behind the wheel lesson plan for shifting. Both the behind the wheel instructors and the theory instructors should be aware of those similarities. Again, same terminology. Communicate with the other instructors. So you may have instructors such as myself that has taught classroom and some behind the wheel. Later on in my tenure at Delaware Tech, I was classroom only. So I needed to make sure that my behind the wheel instructors knew what I was teaching in the classroom so that we could go and be all on the same page. You can do that with regular periodic instructional staff meetings. That is a requirement with the Professional Truck Driving Institute that there is staff development training. Okay, so, and this is so true. Your trainees will blame their poor performance on instructor inconsistency whenever they can. Oh, that's not the way the classroom instructor taught me, or that's not the way the other instructor taught me. So consistency is really big when it comes to this here. Logical sequence of instruction. That's big. So your lesson plans are going to help you be prepared, stay on track. The PowerPoint, again, same thing. It's going to help you be prepared, stay on track. Build upon previously learned information. As I said, the visual search is going to be taught prior to hazard perception, but obviously they tie in closely. So when you're teaching hazard perception, you're going to go back and talk about the importance of visual search. Real big. Sidebar here. I'm driving the big tanker yesterday morning. It's dark. It's about 5 a.m. Actually, it was about 6 a.m. The sun hadn't come up yet. And beyond the spray of my headlights, I thought I saw something move a little bit. Okay, good visual search. I slowed down, and sure enough, I got a little closer. It was about a half a dozen deer shooting across this little 2-lane road that if I had not been paying attention and hadn't slowed down, it wouldn't have been such a good day. Again, yeah, thanks. Pace of delivery. Don't talk too fast. Don't zip through the slide presentation. Encourage questions, provide clear answers, ask questions, invite discussions. Keeping discussions on topic. Sometimes students will take it, take the whole classroom somewhere else. Someone's going to start talking about football, perhaps. And it's like, excuse me, great. That's a break time conversation. You know, let's stay on topic. Keep track of time to ensure the lesson is covered in its entirety and you don't have to cut it short. Some teaching aids. Got a great picture there of a DOT dump truck with a nice big snow plow on it. So models are great. Simulators are great. If you're going to use simulators, you're probably going to have to allow some extra time. Videos are great. Keep them short, current, relevant. There's a lot of great stuff out there on YouTube. There's a lot of bad stuff out there on YouTube. So if you're going to use some YouTube videos and such, make sure you review them ahead of time. Handouts are great. Limit that to forms that they need, guides, checklists, things like that. Some instructors love to go and get news articles and copy those and hand them out. Unless you're going to test on them, that might not necessarily be such a great thing to do. They usually go unread and end up in the trash can. And it's a waste of paper and printer ink. Again, models are great for some demonstrations, backing, jackknifing, and such like that. Trainers at Delaware Tech, we had a great air brake trainer. It was a huge board. It had the air tanks and brake chambers and it was fabulous. Had all the controls for it. We could show how that air brake system worked. It was a whole lot easier than laying on our backs underneath the truck trying to figure out where the parts are. Keeping a rogues gallery of parts so that they can see what these hard to see parts look like. And also you might want to consider some defective parts. This is what a brake shoe looks like when the brake shoe is starting to come loose, or when the lining is starting to come loose from the brake shoe might be an example there. Demonstrations are a great thing. Again, we're talking, this would be lab probably, leaving the classroom, going out onto the range. They're not driving, but you're showing them something, perhaps demonstrating a vehicle inspection. It's going to help illustrate abstract concepts. They're going to see what's happening. It's going to help keep their interest and attention. If you're going to do demonstrations, try and keep it to a reasonably sized group. It's difficult to do a inspection demonstration if you've got 10 trainees hovered around you. It's very difficult for them to see what you're doing. It keeps your interest, attention. It brings theory and application together, theory behind the wheel together. Plan and practice your demonstrations before you do it. And you may have to repeat a demonstration, or at least parts of the demonstration several times, particularly when it comes to the behind the wheel stuff. Personal stories that can be inspirational, motivational, persuasive. I tried to throw a few in here, such as the deer crossing the roadway yesterday morning, but tried to keep it short, relevant to the lesson. It should reinforce the concept that you're talking about. And again, it should not be offensive. It shouldn't be about that crazy weekend at the truck stop. Okay, I'll just leave it there. Next slide, please. Are we frozen? Scott, you with me? I think we're locking up. I'm still stuck on the same slide.
I can hear you good.
Okay.
Give me just a second.
Alrighty. Okay, great. All right, moving right along. Okay, note taking. Note taking should be strongly encouraged. It aids in retention of information, right? So it's engaging. It's not just seeing, hearing, but it's also the tactile senses, you know, left brain, right brain kind of thing. It can be used as a study aid for that student. And the students aren't the only ones that are should maybe take some notes. You know, I got my little notepad here in case there's something that's brought up that I want to address. So instructors should be ready to take their own notes during the lesson. Maybe students' questions to be researched later. Maybe some notes as to what worked right, what worked well, what didn't work well. It's going to help improve your skills because as an instructor, that's an ongoing objective. Next, there we go. Assignments and homework. Now, I don't know how, I didn't teach employees. I taught students that basically were paying me to teach them. So you can give them homework and you don't have to pay them for that time. So I don't know how that works as far as your individual agency, if you're allowed to give them homework. But if you are, I would recommend it. It's a good idea to have them read the text material before the classroom lesson whenever possible. It's going to aid in their comprehension in the classroom. It's going to help you keep your lesson on pace. You might not have to explain something quite as many times, and it's going to get them geared up a bit for that lesson. So again, you're going to have to be, you can't overload them with too much homework because they do have, you know, home life issues also. And they have their adult responsibilities when they get home. So reasonable amount of homework. Okay. Assessments. Okay. Assessments are, it's tests. But tests is such a mean word sometimes. To say where there's going to be a test or an exam can raise a lot of anxiety in your trainees. So we call them assessments, right? A formative assessment is an assessment that's done before they get that end of unit test or quiz. It's going to help me know if my students are getting it, right? So if they're not getting it, stop, don't go further, go back and reinforce that concept. Again, you could use that through informal, or you could perform formative assessment through informal use of strategic questioning, it's called. You know, so you're questioning and answering during the lesson. You can stop and kind of ask them. Now, what is that? What is the 14-hour rule again? Somebody explain it to me in your own words, what the 14-hour rule in the hours of service is. So you can use the questions, pay attention to them. As I said earlier, do they look confused? If they do, again, ask them. A lot of times student doesn't want to say, I'm not getting it. They don't want to announce to the whole class that, you know, that they're dumb. They're not dumb. They just didn't get it. You're going to help them there. Okay. You could use a short ungraded quiz. There are going to be, there's tests included in your or test questions rather, included at the end of your PowerPoint presentation. Many of them are going to be from the test bank. So you can use that in the classroom to help with that formative assessment. Again, it's going to result in better comprehension, better first-time pass rates. Again, summative assessments, summary at the end. I recommend strongly end of unit assessment. So yeah, that's going to be 30 quizzes throughout the theory portion of the training. I think they're going to do better with 30, 10, 15, 20 question multiple choice questions, multiple choice true false type questions, which is very similar to the CDL written test, motor vehicle. I think if you wait to the end of the section and give one big massive final exam, I think you might have a more fail than pass. Okay, they're integrated in each unit, as we had said in the PowerPoint. We have an answer key, so all the correct answers are located in your note in your lecture notes. So you can put the slide up there, question, 4 possible answers, and that could lead to discussion and give you the chance to assess in a formative way. But we also have them so you could print them off, cut and copy and paste, and do your own paper tests if you wish to do it that way. Again, unit tests for the theory must have an 80% pass rate. And Clear Roads has provided a spreadsheet for tracking and documenting the passage or scores of each of the unit tests. You're going to need to keep records as you go along. So an in-training file is where you would keep that information. So you're going to develop an in-training file, one for each student. This is where you're going to keep the various information about that student to report graduation information to the through the training provider registry, and then therefore it will go to the state driver's license agency, keeping in mind that the state driver's license agency, your DMV, whatever you call it in your state, MVA, whatever, is going to have to query the FMCSA to make sure that that person who wants to take the behind the wheel test for their license has passed your ELDT course, where they will not let them take the behind the wheel test, or they will not let them take the knowledge test for the hazmat. You might want to keep driver trainee progress notes. You may have a trainee that's being taught by more than one instructor. They're going to go and be able to see how that trainee is doing in some of the other units. You can record the time spent on certain activities, particularly the behind the wheel activities, but also to help you maybe fine tune your classroom instruction, your theory instruction. You might want to keep track of how much time is spent. Attendance, behavioral issues. I'm sure you have to do that with all of your employees anyway. And then again, your summative assessment scores will need to be recorded. And there's your final grades, right? So you have to use assessments. They can be electronic or written. You need to do that. You're going to determine their proficiency in the knowledge objectives of the theory portion, right, of each unit of instruction. So each of those 30 units within those 5 sections have to be tested, 80% on each of the individual units. So if you're going to use a final, it's going to have to be broken down into the correct number of units. If you do one massive final, it's going to be broken into 30 individual units. So again, I think you're better off just doing that unit by unit. Okay. Record retention. Again, minimum 3 years, unless your state's going to require that you keep them for more than 3 years. Training certification, right? So after that individual, that trainee completes the training, the provider, whoever it is in your agency, must by midnight of the second business day after the trainee completes, electronically transmit that certification information up through the TPR website. All right, so it's imperative that you as the instructor are gathering that data so that the moment they finish or within a very short time frame after they finish, you've got that information to be uploaded, right? And of course, their driver's license information and such like that. The classification or endorsement, type of training, theory, behind the wheel, number of clock hours for behind the wheel training. Again, there is no minimum, but FMCSA is going to keep track of the behind the wheel hours so that they could perhaps in the future review what seems to be the sweet spot when the behind the wheel training hours. Your training provider, your unique TPR identification number, and the date of their successful completion. Online teaching tips. The Clear Roads has a SCORM compliant so that you can integrate the theory into your learning management system if applicable. Online instruction is allowed through the entry-level driver training regulation, as we talked about earlier. It could be live or self-paced, where they are kind of clicking through it. However, interactive does help. It seems to work the best. I've had in the master's of education program that I went through, much of that was online. I've seen really good online instruction, and I've seen lousy online instruction. So if you're going to do it, it's difficult to put together a really good quality online program. It should be, again, interactive, easy to use, and must have a way to document progress and completion. Whew. How am I doing on time, guys? Questions? I see there's one here on the chat.
No, I think those questions have been answered.
Yeah.
Just want to jump in on the SCORM compliant. We did provide SCORM compliant files for all of these PowerPoint units. However, if you wanted to add content, it's best to modify the PowerPoint and then reconvert it into SCORM compliant for your learning management system. You'll notice throughout the PowerPoints, we have placeholders in some of the units for state-specific laws and regulations. For instance, weight limits, interstates, national network or highways are regulated by the federal level, 80,000 pounds, but your state routes and secondary roads, weight limits are regulated at the state level. So we've put placeholders and slides in certain spots for you to add state-specific information. So just keep that in mind. And there's also a placeholder for you to put your DOT logo as well if you choose to do so. So the SCORM compliant versions are there. We weren't asked to do 36 different versions for all 36 Clear Roads members. So there's one version, but it'll be easier for you to manipulate the PowerPoint files themselves if you choose to do so. If there's any questions, if not, we'll take a break for lunch and resume at about 1:10 Central Time, 2:10 Eastern Time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great, Scott. Thanks.
Yep. This new entry-level driver training curriculum. So Chris, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, Scott, I just turned the recording back on for you. I'm figuring out how to do a few of these things, so I'm teachable too. Okay, everybody, welcome back. And we're going to talk about where the rubber hits the road, right? We're going to talk about behind the wheel, which really is kind of where it all comes together, because that's what you're trying to do. Train drivers, operators to do their job out there in the real world. Okay, so in this module, we're going to review behind the wheel instructor qualifications. Again, a bit redundant, but this is important stuff. Reviewing the vehicle and equipment requirements. We will do an overview of the behind the wheel curriculum, just how it's all put together. We'll talk about behind the wheel lesson plans and a complement to the behind the wheel lesson plans that we're calling behind the wheel daily lesson guides and checklists. We'll talk about class management again, but behind the wheel stuff, not much different, but just maybe a few other notions that go along with what we've already talked about. Behind the wheel teaching tips. We've got a video or two that I recorded, I think back in 2012 or 13 when I was doing behind the wheel instruction. So hopefully that'll come through okay. Range and road proficiency documentation, absolutely essential. Goes right along with record keeping, and we'll wrap it up with uploading that info to the training provider registry. Okay, again, just to touch on these major provisions again, can't stress it enough. The curriculum's got to meet the federal ELDT rule. Good news is Clear Road curriculum, 100% compliant, right? You as, not you as an individual, but you as an entity, as an agency, must meet the eligibility requirements to be listed on the training provider registry. You got to go and swear that you're meeting the requirements. And in case you get audited, we talked about that several times, you must be able to supply the records and documentation within 48 hours of FMCSA notifying you that they want the stuff. Okay. Okay. The range training is defined as training that's provided by as defined in the regulations, a behind the wheel instructor, when that trainee has the actual control of the power unit during a driving lesson conducted on the range. Okay. The range training time does not include, and this is important, it doesn't include windshield time as far as just sitting in the back seat or in the passenger seat watching what's going on. It doesn't count the observation time with someone standing alongside the truck watching either a demonstration by an instructor or watching another trainee operate the vehicle. Now, there is some benefit there, but when we talk about time, we're talking recording that time to be later uploaded into the TPR. So they have to be in control of the vehicle to count that as training time for actual record training, record keeping purposes. Likewise, public road training means that it's, again, training that's provided by that instructor who meets the definition as prescribed by the regulation when that entry-level trainee has actual control of the power unit during a driving lesson conducted on a public road. I found it interesting that they're talking about public roads. Some training sites might have a lot of land, but might not be considered a public road. That would still be range. So you would still want to, you got to get them out there on the public road to count that as road driving time. Public road training, I got a little pop-up in my way. Okay, behind the wheel or public road training does not include, again, windshield time, observation time. They have to be in control of the vehicle. Training vehicles and equipment. All vehicles used in behind the wheel training have to comply with federal and state safety requirements. Basically, they got to be tagged is what that means. Got to be able to pass inspection. Training vehicles must be in the same group and type that the driver trainees intend to operate for their CDL test. Just a kind of a side note on that. I don't think you're not going to be dealing with, or probably not too often dealing with a typical truck tractor with a fifth wheel. That cannot be used for Class B, or at least testing at DMV. So if you're training someone for Class B, you really shouldn't use a truck tractor without a trailer attached to it. It would have to be, the dump truck or a traditional Class B vehicle. Okay. Behind the wheel instruction, again, has no minimum hours on behind the wheel units. However, you got to cover all elements that are required to be covered in the regulation. And they have to, the trainees must demonstrate proficiency in all behind the wheel requirements. And this was a big controversial topic when it was called the ELDT, the LDAC committee, pieced together this bit of legislation or regulation, hours versus proficiency. Again, this is why you have to record your hours very carefully and very accurately. No minimum hours, but they have to demonstrate proficiency in each required skill, each and every required skill. And that means a repeated demonstration. So no one and done, not like, okay, they backed up into the alley dock one time, check them off. No, they're going to have to do that a number of times. That's up to you as to what you want to claim as repeated demonstrations of proficiency. Logbooks, right, or electronic logging devices are required for public road training and for record keeping. And I know that logbooks are not required for governmental agencies. You are not going to have to get an electronic logging device, an ELD, but you will have to teach them logbooks. Right here is, I don't know how well you can see it. This is interestingly a log page. I operate with electronic logging devices in the trucks that I drive with the fuel transportation company. The last time I actually had to do a paper log was in June of 2020 when my ELD malfunctioned. I had to pick it up and do a paper log. So they're going to have to know how to do a paper log in the real world. ELDs are great. I love them. I don't like doing the paper log. It's a real pain, but you'll need to teach them that because they still have to know the rules. Right? And again, we'll give you a suggested time frame for the lessons. Okay, so how is the training structure put together? Again, it's fully compliant. The behind the wheels portion is fully compliant with the ELDT regulation. Okay, and your agency and training sites must utilize the curriculum as it pertains to the training you're offering. We talked about this before: Class A, Class B. Right? Again, we understand that there's some regulations or there's some instructional topics that you don't have to deal with because you're a government entity. Again, logbooks, you got to do them. Proficiency with logbooks must be documented per federal law. So you're probably going to go and have the students do paper logs for all their behind the wheel instruction, particularly public road. But it also is a good for documenting time behind the wheel. Okay, again, you don't know much about logbooks and the hours of service rules. You're going to have to do a little bit of research on that so that you're going to be comfortable with it. Okay, Class A and B, like the theory curriculum, as we said earlier, is 5 sections. Each has a number of units of instruction. Theory sections 1 through 3 relate directly to driver behind the wheel training. 4 and 5 is non-driving, is vehicle inspections and non-driving stuff. So 1 through 3 is the driving skills and the theory in the theory section. Behind the wheel instructors have got to be fully aware of what is being taught in those sections 1 through 3 in theory. Clear road curriculum sections and units, again, are numbered the same. So you can cross-reference anything that we're putting forth in a lesson plan with the actual regulation. All right. We got, I see four questions there under chat. All right. Okay, some questions here. Any idea how long classroom instruction should take? Again, it's going to vary a little bit depending upon, one of the points I made was if you are just teaching automatic transmission, that would save a lot of time. A lot of time would go into the non-synchronized transmissions. And Scott, I see answered that with recommended 58 hours. And the other one was if we print a logbook page from the internet, will that be acceptable guide tool? I imagine it would. Logbooks really aren't too expensive, and they do come either with carbonless or those that actually take a piece of carbon paper. If anyone remembers what that stuff is and how to use it, but that would work. But again, you're going to have a one log page for every day of the road training in particular. So let me close this out.
Chris, I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
On that question about the recommended classroom hours, we use best practices. We worked with the Clear Roads subcommittee a bit on these hours. We originally had it closer to 80 hours for the classroom, but understanding that some of these topics you typically don't have to cover in the past, or you don't really have to worry about too much once they have their license and they're out on the road, such as trip planning or log books, that sort of thing. So we worked with the committee and we kind of knocked that down, but we came to kind of using best practices to about 58 hours to get through all 30 classroom units. So that's where it is. Obviously, that'll vary some depending on how in depth you go. Some may go more in depth than what we have. Others may back it down just a little bit, but roughly 58 hours or so should get you through all the classroom training.
Thank you, Scott. And again, training is valuable. Training is extremely important. I know we want to get through, everyone wants to get through training as quickly as possible, but you also want to train them as well as possible. Little side story, this last snowstorm about 2 weeks ago, it was a city snowplow driver, not a state highway snowplow driver, backed into my daughter's car and totaled it. Wish that driver had gotten a little bit more backing training, and particularly the old get out and look GOAL concept that is mandated in the entry-level driver training curriculum. Okay, enough of my woes. Range training, section 2, behind the wheel range. This is what's in it, the vehicle inspection. Actually, that you're not going to get any behind the wheel hours there. It's going to all be working with the vehicle itself, practicing those pre-trip, post-trip, and inspections, and discussing and practicing an en route inspection. Unit 2.2, straight line backing, pretty much straight out of the CDL manual. Straight line backing, alley docking. Now, the CDL manual requires, and for CDL testing, a 90-degree backing. This committee here that formed this regulation wanted the 45-degree included in that. And I think in the PowerPoint that Scott had put together for the alley docking, he shows both of those maneuvers in the diagrams there. Offset backing left and right, parallel parking, blind side, parallel parking, sight side. Of course, blind side would be to the passenger side, and parallel parking, sight side would be the driver's side. And then coupling and uncoupling, and again, that would be for Class A. But again, as we said, if you're doing light trailers on a Class B, those trainees would need to get that type of training also. Okay. All right. Let's see. Alrighty. Just admitting somebody that was knocking at the door. Okay. Behind the wheel public road. It has 12 units under that. All right. Vehicle controls, obviously, can be working on how to use the controls of the vehicle. You can't control the vehicles if you don't know how to use the vehicle controls. No pun intended. Shifting the transmission. Again, going back, if you're teaching good old-fashioned, non-synchronized manual transmission, that is very time-consuming. I know Scott went through, when he was learning how to do that, he can attest that that is a difficult skill set to master, and it takes time. far less time would be devoted to an automatic or what we're driving in the industry now, which is automated manuals. They're manual transmissions that the truck's computer controls the shifting and the operation of the clutch. Communications, signaling, using turn signals, headlights, horns, things like that, appropriate use of such. Putting that visual search into practice so we can see how this is where so much of what was taught in the theory is being put to practice in the actual vehicle itself. Speed and space management, they combine them together. Safe driver behavior. Now, let me talk about this unit 3.6, because if you read the regulation, safe driver behavior really is their final road test. Okay, so it's kind of interesting that they put it as 3.6, not 3.12. Okay, but units 3.7 through 3.12 don't actually have, well, 3.8 through 3.12, we'll get to 3.7 in a moment, but 3.8 through 3.12 don't actually have to be performed. This is what the regulation says. They don't actually have to be performed, but just talked about while you're driving. So very likely in the behind the wheel portion of your training on the road, that is, you're going to be spending perhaps multiple lessons on shifting, let's say, particularly if it's that manual transmission. But you might get to 3.6 and you might have introduced all the concepts, the shifting, the communication, visual search, space and speed management, and then that could be used as additional practice to be wound up or completed with the final road test. During some of these sessions, while you're working on 3.6, you would be discussing hazard perception, railroad and highway grade crossing, night operations, extreme driving conditions, skid control recovery, jackknifing, and other emergencies. But another thought on that is, I personally think taking a trainee out and having them operate at night in real darkness is a very good idea. You guys do a lot of that when you're plowing snow. I know that. If there are railroad crossings in your area, get them used to dealing with those kind of situations. Obviously, you kind of risky to put them on an icy road while they're in training and say, go ahead, put it in a skid. So you would talk about those sorts of things. And then also going back to 3.7, hours of service requirements. In other words, those logbooks, you would be actually helping those students when they're changing duty statuses. In other words, when they're going from driving to on duty, not driving, that they would note that in their logbook. So that would happen throughout all of these behind the wheel lessons. So that takes up a little bit of time also. Okay. Lesson plans. The lesson plans for behind the wheel instruction or lessons are basically put together the same way as the classroom instructions are. Right? It organizes the lesson. It gives you an overview, basically what you're trying to accomplish in a very short description. It has the objectives, and these objectives are really spelled out in the regulation, such as in the range portion of the training, it lists that you must teach them these 6 CDL test exercises: straight line backing, offset, parallel parking, and alley dock. That is specified in the objectives, the skills that must be mastered or they must be proficient at in order to complete that unit of instruction. It's going to have your equipment, materials, textbooks or manuals that would be needed for the lesson. Again, essential learning questions. Again, they're the objectives put into question form. And then the student could ask themselves that question, do I know how to do that? such as an objective might be up and down shift through all the gears of a non-synchronized manual transmission. That placed as an essential learning question might say, how do I shift through all the gears of a manual transmission, for instance? It gives you a sequence of instruction or procedure. Assignments are, I'm sure, rather limited, except perhaps in the case of inspections, you might give a homework assignment that is go home and practice the script, let's say, for the pre-trip inspection for your test at DMV, something like that. And then, of course, what type of assessment and proficiency documentation that you would use. And that there's that statement again, the lesson plans are a required record for ELDT compliance. All right. Just like with a classroom lesson plan, always review the lesson plan for that particular lesson that you're going to be teaching that day. Use the lesson guides and forms during the behind the wheel session. So in other words, you're going to review the lesson plan before you teach the lesson. It's going to get you on track, going to get your head together for what you're going to do that day, remind you what you're going to need and so forth like that. But it's probably, you're not going to be reading that or looking at that or referring to that really while you're teaching the lesson. What you're going to use while you're teaching the lesson is going to be a lesson guide and particular forms that are going to help you stay on track, and it's going to help you record important information such as a student's progress or trainee's progress towards proficiency. How many times did they grind gears? How many times today have they made a sloppy right-hand turn or a good left-hand turn? And that can be used for easy reference. It can be making progress notes for the students. You'll keep that on a clipboard, carry that with you on that behind the wheel lesson. And of course, you're documenting the proficiency with the use of that. And you can also use that for feedback to the students. Like, look, you know, your left turns are great, but your right turns, you keep bumping the curb. You bumped the curb 3 times today on a right-hand turn. So we need to work on that. I think that makes sense. So here's a lesson of an example of a daily lesson guide. Scott has put it together in more of a usable form rather than fitting that on the. It's more difficult to fit it on the PowerPoint than it is to in the actual format. So he's put it together in this way. So this is one on unit 3.4 visual search. You see it's got some notes to the instructor. Right? Ensure all your unit objectives and essential learning questions are reviewed and correctly performed by the driver trainee during the training drive. Use the checklist below to track the unit objectives and driver trainee proficiency. Remember to record the driver trainees behind the wheel time and retain on file. So it's helping you there. And it's got a place for you to put the name of the trainee because you use one form for each day for each trainee. Okay, so the trainee's name, the date, instructor's name, that's particularly important if you're going to have, if a trainee might be having different instructors from day to day, perhaps, or at different points in their training. The time of day you start the behind the wheel lesson, end time, how much road time they got today, and then how much road time in total. If you're doing that running tally of road time, that's going to help you when you get to the end of the training. You've already got the number of behind the wheel hours that would need to be uploaded into the TPR. Further on down that form, it has the proficiency goals. Okay, so these are basically stated in the regulation. Okay, the things that this student is going to have to do. Now, the first 4, I believe it is, well, it's awful small. The first 4, is that 5? No, 4. You only have a proficiency and a deficiency check. You're not going to go and practice getting in and out of the truck using 3 points of contact over and over and over again. But if we look a little further down, visual search on the highway, um, secondary roads, urban city, all these things. There's a number of check boxes for proficiency and a number of check boxes for deficiency, so that student and you in particular can see just how they are doing in particular skills. Because you'll find that some, like I used the left turn and right turn example, might have more trouble on one thing than another, and it helps you concentrate in an area, helps you give them a pat on the back when they're doing good, and a nice, gentle, positive, swift kick when it comes to the deficiencies. All right, and then at the very bottom of the form, any comments that the instructor wants to make. These could be comments to kind of jar your memory for the next training session, or to let a different instructor know. Maybe someone's out sick a day and a different instructor is picking up that trainee, kind of gets an idea where they're at. And then did they achieve overall proficiency? Again, no one and done. That's why we have a number of proficiency checks. So you're documenting, no, they got it right 5 times. I think we can give them a thumbs up there. So a place for you to sign date, or your instructor to sign a date, and a place for that trainee to sign a date. Textbooks and manuals. Again, that AMVA manual, your state CDL manual, is an excellent resource for behind the wheel training. It covers all the required entry-level driver training skills, right? It gives you detailed information for CDL vehicle inspection testing. It's got nice diagrams of all the CDL testing exercises, and it gives you guidance for the CDL road testing. Now, it doesn't have the actual test forms that motor vehicle uses, but they're pretty easy to get a hold of. I'm sure you could get a hold of some of the actual paper test forms, and you could use those as a way to document proficiency also. All right, now class management, pretty similar to the classroom or the theory, except you're probably dealing with much smaller groups. At Delaware Tech, we worked in groups of 3. So on the range, it would be 3 students to 1 truck. We also would use 1 instructor who could watch 2 groups of students. So 1 instructor would watch 2 trucks on the road, 3 students each maximum, and that seemed to work very well. For behind the wheel on the road, we did 3 trainees maximum to 1 instructor. So those ratios, there's no ratios mandated in the regulation. However, those have always been kind of recommended. If you go more than 3 to 1 in the truck on the road, kind of hard to fit, let's say 5 people in the truck. Is definitely almost impossible to fit 6, even if you've got a crew cab. But again, as a trainer, again, professional manner all the time, your conduct, your language, absolutely essential. You're going to lead by example. Positive learning environment. It is so easy for a trainee in behind the wheel to really feel that they are just the world's worst. Learning to back a trailer can be very challenging for just about everybody. You'll have some that pick it up quick and some that just don't seem to get it. Patience is going to be very important there. Equally true on the road. Got to manage your conduct and the conduct of others in the learning environment. Out there on the range, it's very easy for students who are observing another trainee learning to back to be totally bored with it. There's ways to engage those students who are observing. There's ways to engage them to learn from watching the mistakes that another student makes. So again, that can help keep it a positive learning environment. You're going to, as I said, lead, inspire, motivate your trainees. You set the example. If you're going to do demonstrations, again, practice them. There's nothing more satisfying than doing a perfect alley dock or perfect parallel park in front of your trainees. They're going to think that you're the world's greatest when you pop it in there the first time. Absolutely perfect. And they might be more interested in paying attention to what you have to say. Effectively communicate and to listen. So you're gonna have to speak clearly, understandably, and you're gonna have to listen to them and of course watch them, because you can learn a lot from watching a student. Again, back up a trailer. I could watch the steering tires on that tractor, on that truck, and could see exactly what's going on in a confused student's mind and then bring that to their attention. So listening, also we can listen with our eyes. And again, you got to keep those accurate records. Again, redundant here. They're not passive learners. They are adults. They want to be treated like adults, want to be treated in a respectful manner. They are obviously very active in the behind the wheel. They're doing it. It is hands-on. They're going to come with expectations. They're going to expect you to be an expert. They are bringing their own experiences to the learning environment. I'm sure that you've had trainees that were raised on the farm, so to speak. They've been back in trailers since they were 10 years old, and they're great. And you get somebody else who was raised in the city, perhaps, and it's going to take longer for them to be trained. Maybe you can go and pair those up, and the one that's very experienced can give a little bit of advice to that one who is really struggling. Again, they're going to process information when they can best relate to it. I addressed that in the earlier module. And again, if they feel they're respected, valued, appreciated, they're going to do better. No, like I said, they're no different than you or I. Again, repetitious here, clear and concise. Avoid confusing language. Watch your slang terms for various parts on the truck. If I'm calling it a Jake brake and someone else is calling it an engine retarder, if that's not made clear to that student or that trainee, they can be very confused. And again, that's just one example that comes to mind as to the technical term for something and the slang term. When you're in the truck out there on the road, things are happening a lot faster, as I'm sure you experienced instructors, experienced behind the wheel instructors know. I found that I needed to be very clear in what I wanted my students to do. They had to understand me the first time I said it, and I needed to say it slowly, clearly, concisely. And the example I use here is, I wouldn't say slow down, because that's a little ambiguous. That's a little confusing. It's not clear. What do I mean when I say slow down? Do I want you just to back off the gas? Or do I want you to hit the brakes? How hard do I want you to hit the brakes? So I would often say no gas. It was fewer syllables. I got the message out faster. Or I would say brake, more brake. A little worried about saying brake harder. I don't want them to put me through the windshield. Again, the terminology that's used out on in the truck should be the same as used in theory, or perhaps the theory instructors need to use the same terminology that you're going to use in the truck. So again, there's that sharing of information between the behind the wheel instructors and the theory instructors. Here's a big one. It's not always easy to do. All right, your verbal and your nonverbal communications. It's easy to get a bit excited when students are doing some scary things in the truck that can make you nervous. You don't want to make them even more nervous. They do best when they're calm, and they're going to stay calm when you stay calm. I would always talk with the students before their very first behind the wheel training session out on the road, that is, and I would let them know that I'm human. I will do my best to stay calm, but if you scare me, I might scream. If we need to, we'll pull the truck over so we can all calm down. So again, it's important you try and stay calm, set the rules and your expectations before you take them out there on the road. Mistakes should really be viewed as a learning opportunity. Okay. This is how we did it wrong, but this is how we're going to do it right moving forward. Praise them for getting it right. It goes a long way. Literally a pat on the back. Go ahead. All right. So this is a sample of an introduction that I did of a behind the wheel lesson. I'm actually working with a student on, we had a very large range. It was a part of a runway, a decommissioned runway on the county airport is where we had our training range. And the engine, the noise the engine makes as an idle kind of conflicts with the, I guess, how my vocal cords resonate. So when the truck is idling, it almost sounds like I'm sitting in a helicopter. But once the truck gets moving, my voice clears up, or you'll be able to hear me more clearly. But I'm going to talk to the student as to what is expected during this lesson, how I'm going to conduct the lesson. So take it away, Scott. Let it rip. I get no sound.
You have to on a range. The first foot here, if you just stay on the low side of the transmission, you're not going to touch the throttle lower first. Transmission has to be very forgiving at first. Once you get the coordination out, start using the throttle. Timing and timing. We're going to do it. We're going to shift 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop. So we'll have to talk. Once we get pretty good at shifting, the first one is on the low range.
God, you want to kill the sound, and I'll kind of give a little talk.
So we're on downshifting.
Yeah, knock it all the way off. Okay. Basically, what I'm doing here is I'm letting the student know that before the shifting lesson, I'm going to have them put the vehicle in motion. We're not going to use the throttle. We're going to just use the clutch and the stick because it's more forgiving that way. And we're going to just go 1, 2, 3, 4, stop the truck. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop the truck. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop the truck. And then once they get that down, they work on the coordination. Then we're going to go and start to actually use the throttle, which makes timing of the shift so much more critical. So then we're going to work on the timing. So I'm explaining to the student that we're going to work on the coordination between the left foot on the clutch and the right hand on the stick during this double clutching procedure. And then once we get moving along, we do better. Then we're going to start using the throttle pedal, and it's another, it's another foot involved there. So it's left foot, and right hand. And that how we're going to go and work this lesson so they know what to expect. Okay, so all right, so again, that made it a little bit easier for me if I let the student know how this little training exercise was going to work, and then work with them on it, and it seemed to work quite well. Rather than just much better than just saying, well, let's get up in here. You read the book, you saw the PowerPoint during the theory stuff. Let's give her a whirl. It made it a lot easier. And that was probably after I already gave a demonstration, showed them how to do it. All right, consistency. You're going to be consistent. not just within that one training class, but from class to class, by being familiar with your lesson plans, with the complementary units of instruction, and okay, use that terminology again, the same terminology between theory instructors, behind the wheel instructors, communicate with other instructors. Again, make sure everyone's on the same page. Those periodic staff meetings are very important there, real important. Again, in that behind the wheel stuff, if a trainee's having problems doing shifting, or the way that they're not downshifting before turn properly, and they say, well, that's not the way so-and-so taught me. And they're going to put the blame on you instructors instead of taking the responsibility for doing better on themselves. To keep you on sequence, use your lesson plans and those daily lesson guides. Again, the lesson plans review before the lesson guides you're taking with you out onto the range or into the truck, and you're going to use that to guide that behind the wheel lesson. Again, build upon previously learned information from earlier lessons. You're going to start with those easy skills and build up from there. I think it's pretty common sense to say, yes, you teach them straight line backing first before they do parallel parking. That simpler skill, that's easier to master or to demonstrate competence in before doing the more difficult skills. Review and compare those new skills to the previously learned skills for a better understanding of the new concepts, such as, and this is very true, parallel parking is very similar to offset backing. If they'd already mastered offset backing, which is then parallel parking would be the next thing to go to. It is very similar, and you can explain to them that this is just a little trickier. Excuse me, you can go just a little bit slower. So again, compare it to skills they've already learned, and it's going to they're going to do better that way. Demonstration, as I stated earlier, before I went and took that student out in that wonderful clear audio video, I demonstrated it to that student first. This is what we're going to do. This is how it works. Then got them behind the wheel, talked about it again, and then let them do it. So they're going to use me or use you as a model. They're going to imitate your skill. They can see what's happening. That truck is moving. They can feel what's happening. You know, when they engage, when they put that vehicle into motion smoothly, it is just that, it's smooth. And when they put it into motion abruptly, they feel it when everyone's head jerks back. Again, it brings together the theory and that application, planned and practice. I addressed that earlier. And you often need to go and repeat the demonstrations as many times as needed. Now on the range, when one student is, I talked about engaging the students that are on the ground watching another student or trainee do a particular skill. You can be talking with them also. Look at this, look at that. See what he's doing right, see what she's doing wrong, so forth like that. Assignments and homework. Behind the wheel training, very little in the way of homework, except for maybe practicing, as I said earlier, the script or the right talk for passing the CDL test for vehicle inspection. You can consider them reading some text material as practical, including in the CDL manual. Go reread. You know, today you had a little trouble with your right turn. Reread that section in the CDL manual on right turn, so you understand how you're going to be assessed, how you're going to be scored. The closest you can come to having them practice their driving might be the way they drive their own personal car. Is from now on, you start driving your personal car in a safe and professional manner. That goes a long way. Formative assessments. You're constantly going to be doing formative assessments with your trainees. It's done during each training session. Those proficiency goals that are on the checklist is how you're going to do it. You're going to just make a little check under those various criteria, whether they're doing it right or they're doing it wrong. Right? Again, it's going to help you, and it's going to help that trainee see their improvement in the skills, particularly with shifting and non-synchronized transmission, because that was always one of the most challenging skills to teach. Quite often, trainees feel like they just can't do anything right, but because they grind the gears so often. But if you're keeping track of that with little hash marks or check boxes, you can show them. You see, you ground the gears a lot fewer times today than yesterday or last week or something like that. So you're going to see and document their improvement in their skills using that daily checklist, and they're going to be able to see it. Okay, now summative assessment. Remember, summative assessment is not required by the ELDT regulation. Okay. However, again, you have to instruct them on all the required elements, and they have to demonstrate proficiency in all the behind the wheel requirements. So you got to have some way of recording that. So your daily lesson guides, behind the wheel lesson guides, are going to help you do that by demonstrating or by recording repeated demonstrations of proficiency. All right. So again, as I said, it's on that daily behind the wheel lesson guide. Another way of you might want to use, we did this at Delaware Tech. Motor Vehicle does it every time they test somebody, using the CDL testing standards on the range and the public highway. I mean, that's the way they are eventually going to be tested for motor vehicle anyway. So you might as well include all those elements: left turns, right turns, intersections, so forth like that, on that. I'm trying to remember the name of what that was there when we talked about the 12 units in the behind the wheel. It was number 6 on that. It was the proficiency check. Use the CDL testing standards, right? Again, for range and highway. And again, we're going to give you an Excel spreadsheet for tracking and documenting the various student records. Again, in training file, those behind the wheel lesson guides are going to be a big part of your training file. You're going to keep that in a folder for each student. That will have the trainee progress notes. That will have the time that's spent on certain activities. You can document any attendance, behavioral issues there. And it's also going to be where you're going to store the skills proficiency documentation and all the records that are needed to be able to upgrade that individual has achieved proficiency and has passed the course. All right. Same record retention requirements, 3 years. Got to hang on to them unless your state says you got to hold on to them for a longer period of time. All right, same thing. Now, remember we said, it may have been Matt that said we can have the theory taught by one training provider and the behind the wheel taught by another. So once a trainee has completed the theory, that information is uploaded within 48 hours. And then once they complete the behind the wheel, then that information has to be uploaded in 48 hours. It is up to the individual training provider whether they want to do all theory before they go into the behind the wheel, or they could go and do, as was stated earlier, they could do some of that. They could do theory 2 days a week, followed by 3 days a week of behind the wheel, and have the whole thing done in let's say 4 or 6 weeks, something like that. So whether you want to do it, split it up, or if you want to do it all together, that's up to you. But you still have to have all the records done, moved up into the TPR website within 48 hours. And there's that same information that we saw earlier. All right. Okay. 7. I'm gonna try. I said 7. Okay. I'm trying to remember why, Scott. If you remember why I said 7 and not 6.
Well, 7 is because we're including the 45 degree that the regulation.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, I got you. Okay, there's actually 6 CDL exercises. Okay, we upload the training for students more than one segment at a time. Okay, Larry, good question. You're going to upload the information, right? The graduation information when they have completed theory, and it will be just for the theory. And then once they complete the behind the wheel, road and range, you put up, you would go and transmit up to the TPR their graduation information, including time behind the wheel and such. It's not unit by unit. It's just an overall completion. And it's going to be 2 times that information is uploaded. 1 for theory, 1 for behind the wheel. You got a thumbs up. Okay. Okay. So the skills test exercises are broken into 3 categories. I used to tell trainees hard, harder, and hardest. Okay. So they've got these skill exercises into 3 categories. And when they go to motor vehicle to for their skills testing, the range testing, the parking and maneuvering testing, they're going to have to perform 1 from each of the categories, and they're supposed to be randomly selected. Okay, so they should only have to do 3. Now, your state could be tougher. They're allowed to be tougher. They're just not allowed to be easier. Okay. The minimum passing score is 12 points. And in this case, points are bad. So points are bad. A perfect score would be 0, 12 points. You still pass. 13 points, and they stop you right then and there. You don't go any further. Students must also complete all exercises as directed. And because, can a trainee do the range and road before they obtain a CDL permit? I'm not sure what you mean by can they do range and road before they get the permit. Okay, you cannot take a student on the road legally unless they have a permit. But since range is being done on private property, I guess you don't have to have a permit. But road, most definitely. I hope that answered that question. Okay. Again, I'm going to say 6 CDL. Okay, you're welcome, Steve. 6 CDL exercises, and because the regulation included the 45 degree, that's why we have 7. But motor vehicle only does the 90 degree. So there are 6 skills exercises, 3 categories, 1 randomly selected from each category. So because they're randomly selected, the student doesn't know which one they're going to get when they get the motor vehicle. So they have to learn all 6 of them and become proficient in all 6 of them. So here we go. Skills exercise number 1, category number 1 only has 1 exercise in it. It's straight line backing. So how can you randomly select from a category of that has 1? You don't. So they will all get straight line backing. Right? Typically, that is the first maneuver that they will do at a motor vehicle. Okay, so go ahead. All right, so exercise category number 2 is going to have offset to the left, okay, which is actually on the right side of your screen, and offset to the right is actually, no, I'm sorry. Offset to the left is on the left side. I'm looking at it backwards. Haven't done this in a while. All right, so there are your two offset backing. That's skill exercise number two, or category number two. They're going to get one of those. They don't know which one. And then skills exercise number three. So this is obviously the hardest category. It has the 90-degree alley dock for CDL testing. The 45 is required to be taught in the ELDT. Okay, so they're not going to do a 45 at motor vehicle for their license. They're going to do a 90-degree. But the regulation says they have to be taught the 45-degree in addition to the 90-degree. And then you have the parallel park, sight side and blind side or conventional. So, okay, now I'll talk a little bit about scoring. Now, before I get into the scoring, again, I want to emphasize that this is the AMVA recommendation for how the exercise should be done and how it should be scored. The dimensions, the requirements, and the scoring. Many states, I can't say many, some states have additional penalties, I'll say, such as Delaware, for instance, they test exactly to this. This is the way Delaware does it, and quite possibly your state. Other states, it's been a while since I took a student to Maryland MVA for CDL testing, but Maryland MVA added a few things, such as Maryland MVA, if you were to have an encroachment, touch a cone, cross a line, it's an automatic failure. They stop the truck right there. Student has to apply the brakes, get out of the truck, and the instructor or whoever the CDL holder that accompanied that trainee to MVA had to get in the truck and move it off the range. They weren't even allowed to move it off the range. It was the end of the test. The CDL scoring, as it is here and recommended by AMVA, allows that trainee to get out of the truck and look before they hit a cone. They would allow them to, put it neutral, set the brakes, get out and look, and then get back in the truck and continue. They were allowed to do that. In Maryland, at least they could have changed it by now, but they did not allow them to get out of the truck and look. So your state might do this a little bit differently. Okay, so with that caveat, let me talk about straight line backing. Okay, all the exercises are a 12-foot wide lane or parking spot. Straight line backing, it's a 100-foot long lane, 12-foot wide. The trainee will drive that vehicle all the way till the rear of the vehicle or the rear of the trailer is even with or past the last cone or the first cone, depending upon how you want to look at it. They're supposed to toot the horn and back straight through it. Now, if they hit a cone, cross a line with any part of the vehicle, they're stopped. They're assessed 2 points for an encroachment. Then they will need to likely pull up to realign the vehicle. That's one more point. If they need to get out, that's 1 point. And there's something called final position, which the best I could get out of anyone at AMVA is that basically means failing to complete the exercise as directed. Technically, the way this was written was they were a trainee's supposed to fail if they can't complete the exercise as directed. But this pretty much ensures a failure anyway if you get 10 points that quickly. On the straight line backing, and only the straight line backing, the trainee is allowed one free pull-up and one free look. After that, the second pull-up or the second look would count as one demerit or 1 point against them. Go ahead. All right, offset backing to the right. Again, we've got a lane there, and it's probably going to be the straight line backing lane. They're going to drive through this lane, and if it's a Class A vehicle, they're going to stop the bumper. There'll be a line out there that's 140 feet from the last cone in the lane. They'll stop there. They have to pull straight, and then they have to maneuver over to the lane in the right and put the entire vehicle in that lane. Right? Again, scoring is the same. 2 points for the encroachment, 1 point for a pull-up or a look, 10 points if they can't complete it as directed, except because this is a more difficult maneuver, they're allowed 2 free pull-ups and 2 free looks. Oh man, there's 5 questions here. All right. Where are we now? Oh, we've answered all those. I'm sorry. Excuse the interruption. Okay, so offset backing to the left, it's basically the mirror image of the offset backing to the right. Again, 140 foot. Oh, I failed to mention, if it's a Class B vehicle, they're only going up 100 feet. Okay, so they won't pull 140 feet. Class A, they pull up 140 feet past that last cone. Class B, 100 feet past that last cone. You're going to toot the horn, and they're going to back the entire vehicle into that lane on the left. They are not allowed to pull out to the left, go straight, and then straight line back. However, once they pull straight forward, they can go and put, let's say, part of their trailer or part of the truck between the first 2 cones and then pull up straight. Again, you might find that your motor vehicle does not allow that, but they have to pull straight up out of the lane and then maneuver into that lane to the left. Again, yeah, go ahead. All right, so the 45 and the 90-degree alley dock. Again, the 45 foot, which is on the figure to the upper right, that is a way of, I guess it's kind of a little different from the way we used to do the 45 in the past. I guess since you only have to train it, you don't have to prepare them for a motor vehicle test on it unless your state does something a little different. Often we would pull the truck or the tractor trailer up at a 45-degree angle to the parking space. Here, the parking space is put on a 45-degree angle. Either way, so let's look at the figure on the left. That is your 90-degree alley dock. You'll notice that the way it's set up is, again, you've got a 12-foot wide, 40-foot deep alley, right? The trainee will drive past it, probably about halfway between the beginning of the parking spot and that row of orange dots or orange barrels there, which is a limiting line, so to speak. So they're going to pull past it, and then they're going to back into that parking spot. They're going to need to put the entire vehicle, or as much as the vehicle will fit in there. Obviously, if you've got a 45-foot trailer. Question: Arizona does not require a 90 or 45. Do we have to teach them? Absolutely, you must. It is a requirement of the regulation. And you got to demonstrate proficiency. You have to document proficiency. I was at a meeting with AMVA a number of years ago when they were piloting a new testing carousel, they call it. And that's, you move from here to this exercise to this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And it was a very different carousel. It did not include these exercises. So I don't know if they actually abandoned that idea, because I had told them with the entry-level driver training regulation, you're now making extra work for these students. They still have to learn these 6 exercises, and now you've given them some new stuff. So I don't know if any states have, if anybody, if they're doing that new kind of strange carousel in your state, let me know. Because you're still going to have to teach these 6 exercises. I mean, all these 7, you have to teach these 7, and they will likely be tested on 6 of them. Okay, so again, 12-foot wide, 40-foot deep alley. that has got a 3-foot, we call it a bumper box, a painted area. If you look at the bottom very carefully, you'll see where the rear of that trailer is in the parking spot. There's a 3-foot bumper box there. They have to get their rear of their vehicle into that bumper box without hitting the barrels at the end or the cones at the end. That's where that free being able to get out and look can be very helpful. The scoring is again 2 points for an encroachment. Encroachments always cost you 2 points. There is no free encroachment. Pull-ups and looks are 1 point each. If you can't get the rear of that vehicle in that bumper box, that is a 10 points of damage. That's pretty much a guaranteed failure. And again, inside the alley, getting the entire vehicle inside the alley is basically failure to complete as directed. That's again another 10 points. 2 free pull-ups, 2 free looks. If your state allows looks, encourage your trainees to take advantage of that, because that's what we want them to do. Had that city snowplow driver gotten out and taken a look, he wouldn't have backed into my daughter's car and totaled it. Okay, parallel park, it's pretty much the same side or blind side or conventional. You've got a 12-foot wide parking space, and it's going to be 15 feet longer than your vehicle. So it really isn't any disadvantage if your I'll just say tractor trailer, forgive me for that, but if your combination unit is longer, one a little longer than the other, it probably isn't going to make much of a difference. 15-foot space, I found, makes it really easy for a Class B. That's lots of room. It's a lot tighter if you're going for a Class A. So 12-foot wide, 15 foot longer than the vehicle. The vehicle pulls past the parking space parallel to it. They can't turn out. They got to stay parallel to it. And then they back into it. While backing into it, if they need to pull out at an angle, they may. It's their initial setup has to be parallel to that parking spot. Encroachments, pull-ups, encroachments 2 points, pull-ups and looks 1 point. Again, final position is generally if they don't have the entire vehicle within the parking spot, they're going to get hit with 10 points. They do have the free pull-ups and looks. Personally, when I've taught this, I found one of the most common places for a trainee to encroach would be on this exercise here, the left rear of the power unit. They seem to be so focused in on the trailer that on that left rear of the power unit, that corner, that tends to go over the line or hit a cone. That's the one spot they kind of lose track of because they're so focused on the trailer. That's a much easier maneuver for Class B. All right, and again, your conventional parallel park, same thing, same scoring, same setup. You're just coming in it from the other side. I've been asked by countless students, what is easier, conventional or site side? And some students, they do great on one and have a challenge on the other. It's as crazy as it sounds. But when teaching this, you'll probably find that if they learn to line up their trailer on one of the cones on the, and I call it the curb side, it gives them a little frame of reference, and that can help them. They need to use those cones as things to sight on, fixed objects to sight on, and that's quite helpful. So, all right. Oh my goodness, we're there.
Oh, well, thanks, Chris. Just want to, before we open up to any questions and discussion, just want to remind everyone, keep in mind these 3 training modules. That first module is really kind of dedicated for management / CDL coordinators, someone that might oversee your instructors. The second one can be used standalone by itself for instructors that may only teach the theory. And that third one we just went through could also be used standalone if you have any instructors that are just going to do behind the wheel training on the range or road. A couple things to note there. Chris mentioned the CDL test sheets that Department of Motor Vehicles typically uses. We actually have copies of those that are included with this Clear Roads materials. So you'll have a copy of the pre-trip inspection form that motor vehicle uses, as well as the range and the road testing score sheets. So with that said, we'll open it up to any questions or discussion, anything before we wrap this up.
It's got to look like there are a few comments in the chat.
I think we answered all of them.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Were there any states out there that are using or piloting this this different testing carousel at DMV? I don't recall what states they were using it at. Usually when they do that, AMVA will work with like 3 states and they'll try this new way of testing.
I believe we looked at that. I believe they were testing it in New Hampshire was one of the 3.
Yeah.
And then I forget the other 2 states, but I knew New Hampshire was one of them.
Right. I know AMVA, when they get that in their head that this is the new thing, it's kind of hard to shake them and say, look, I see a problem with that, because they're just very convinced of that. So I don't know if they went forward with it, or if they really did resign themselves to understanding that they came up with a different testing carousel that adds more work to training. It didn't take into consideration the mandate of these 6 or these 7 exercises in the regulation.
And for anybody that's not familiar with AMVA, it's the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators.
They're the ones that design the CDL manual. They're the ones that design the CDL tests, the written tests, and the behind the wheel tests.
And to Steve from Arizona, I looked up your CDL manual just now. It's very interesting to me that all they require you to do is the straight line back, the offset left, and the blind side parallel park is all fits in your manual, that surprises me that it would be, they'd have you do parallel, not an alley dock, which is more practical.
Well, Scott, the only reason that I could think of for them doing that is here in Delaware, some of the motor vehicle, their testing pads are not large enough to accommodate all 6 of the exercises. So some states or sites in Delaware have got special dispensation that they don't have to do all 6 of them, such as one of the ones in Newcastle County. They know that they can only do a straight line, an offset one side, and a parallel park. So they don't even have to learn to do an alley dock.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box or unmute yourself and just speak up. We'll stick around for however long is necessary.
Yep.
Or if you don't have any questions, feel free to drop off now.
I have one question, just for my reference. So earlier you were discussing about the grouping and how one is randomly selected. So if you go to like slide 37, where you have skills exercise 3 and you have the 90-degree and the 2 parallel parks, is that considered a group, and one of those skills would be randomly selected, either the 90 or the parallel parks, or am I getting that, or am I off base on that?
You would get one of those 3.
Okay.
Okay, so you got parallel park, left, right. They would pick one of those. They would pick one of the offsets, left or right, and you're guaranteed to get a straight line. So theoretically, the way it's supposed to be done is if you were to take 3 trainees to motor vehicle that day, they should all get a different version of the skills test. You know what I mean?
Yep, makes sense. Thank you.
So can a CLP be issued before taking any part of the ELDT program? So you can begin the theory training without your learner's permit. However, prior to behind the wheel out on the public roads, they have to have their commercial learner's permit. So yes, they can get their learners prior to completing or starting their ELDT training. Because to get your learner's permit, you just show up to the Department of Motor Vehicles and you have to take the knowledge test, an air brakes test, and the combination vehicle written test. And you pass those 3 written tests, you're issued your commercial learner's permit.
And Scott, one thought on that is, and very likely most schools are going to do, or most training providers are going to do theory, then behind the wheel. If they do it that way, once the trainees have completed sections 1, 2, and 3, send them to motor vehicle for their testing. Because now you've got 4 and 5, sections 4 and 5, which are not really on the CDL test. They're not on the CDL permit written test and motor vehicle. So you can knock that out, and it still gives them time to, maybe go back to motor vehicle and test again and again. And in the test bank that we have put together, we've tried to incorporate as many, particularly in those sections 1, 2, and 3, we've tried to incorporate as many as the questions that they might see at motor vehicle. No one has the current test bank, but the old test banks are out there all over the place, and they've used a lot of the old questions. Like I said, when I went to retake my hazmat written test, and a lot of those test questions are rather tricky. Even though I'm a hazmat hauler, I needed to study, and I studied those questions, flew through it. So if they finished your sections 1, 2, and 3 and successfully passed all those unit tests that we provided, they should have a much easier time going for their permit at motor vehicle.
So I see there's another question. Are there any parts of the theory training that we do not need to cover when someone comes for training who already has a permit? So
I can answer that only if they came to you with a permit before February 7th, 2022.
Yep.
After that, you got to teach it all.
Or they would have had to complete the theory training at another certified training provider and come to you for behind the wheel.
Oh, yes. If they've come with a training certificate from perhaps an online provider, absolutely. Then you're not going to have to teach them any theory. You just do the behind the wheel stuff. So could you, your state or your agency, outsource that? Absolutely. However, we've put this together for you. Use it.
So just so I'm clear, they need this even before they can go get their permit.
No, they can get their learner's permit prior to going through this training.
Okay, all right.
Now, with that said, a lot of as Chris just mentioned, I think a lot of what the training providers will be doing, and we've talked to a number of agencies, they will use that theory portion to make sure their drivers, pass that written test to get that permit, but it's not required.
Gotcha. So just like a bonus, it'd be just to help them get the permit.
Yep, but even if they come to you with the permit already, they still have to go through the theory training.
Yep. Yeah, that I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? And feel free to reach out to us. Chris, Matt, and my email were on the invite that you should have received for this webinar. So feel free to send us an email if any other questions come up, and we'll get back to you with the answers. Like I said, this webinar and the modules, as well as all the other materials, are available through Clear Roads. So if you haven't had access to it, you can reach out to Greg Wadley. He's the consultant for Clear Roads that was working on this. His email was also included on the invite. So, reach out to him if you need access to that website for these materials.
I see another question here. We train seasonal drivers to get a Class B. If we hire them full time, we train them to get a Class A. Do they need to do the whole ELDT again if it's only been 6 months? I'm not quite sure.
So I think the way I understand the question, your seasonal drivers, you train them to get a Class B, but if you were to hire them full time and get their Class A, do they need to do the whole training?
Everything except those, what is it? Everything except in Unit 5, they only have to go over those two portions. They'll only have to go over hours of service and fatigue and wellness awareness, but they're going to have to go through everything. Now, because there is no hour requirement, you might be able to demonstrate proficiency much faster with someone you've already trained for a B when they go for an A. That make sense?
Okay, as another question, has any information been released on submitting the training records? And are you referring to uploading them to the training provider registry? Okay, so he's talking about uploading to the training provider registry. So I know we briefly touched on it earlier. When you have lots of drivers, there is a web service that you can use to just batch upload all of the driver documentation at once. For that to happen, you have to work with your IT department, and FMCSA on the TPR website has a link that you can download for your IT department to do the back end work to get that set up for you. And FMCSA will provide a security key that allows you secure encrypted access. But for those agencies that only maybe have 1 or 2 drivers a month, it may make more sense for them just to manually upload. So you would just log into your TPR registry under your account for your agency, and then just manually upload the documents for those drivers. There's another question. Do trainees have to pass through the clearinghouse in order to proceed to get their license?
That would be the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, I presume. Okay, so do they have to pass through the clearinghouse to get the license? Not to get a license, but they have to pass through the clearinghouse, from what I understand, in order for an employer, or at least a motor carrier. I don't know if the states are exempt from querying the clearinghouse, but in order to be employed, they have to pass the clearinghouse. And a commercial driver is queried annually as part of their annual update of records and driving records and such to maintain the driver qualification file.
So we have another question. If we are not training people for hazmat, do we still go over that section? No, you do not have to go over hazmat if your driver do not need to get the hazardous materials endorsement. We've included that training. We did the survey, as Matt mentioned, early on in this project of the Clear Roads members. And a number of Clear Roads agencies mentioned that they haul explosives, blasting agents, which are definitely hazardous materials. Some said they haul large quantities of fuel. So that's also hazardous materials, but we understand there are some agencies that may not haul hazmat. So that is up to your agency whether they need to get that endorsement or not.
Scott and Matt, I had a follow-up there for Sean. I can see you there, Sean. How you doing? You're looking up at me. All right, Sean, about the clearinghouse. From what I gather, because again, I have been queried on the clearinghouse. If you apply, I was laid off during COVID from hauling the gas. So I put in an application to drive for a contractor for FedEx. I later got called back to work and didn't go to them, but they had queried the clearinghouse. Now, in order for the clearinghouse to give this employer information about me, I had to consent to it. Okay. And I got notification that if I did not consent to them looking at my drug and alcohol testing records. Now, this is a company I do not work for, right? I've passed all my drug tests with the company I do work for. But when I applied to, if I did not give them consent to look at my clearinghouse information, my CDL would be suspended. I was like shocked. So it was like, wow. I mean, I got the letter from motor vehicle telling me I need to go and do this. So you have the option of saying you can't look at my records, but there could be a real penalty. So when you train your students and you get into the drug and alcohol stuff, you definitely need to cover that clearinghouse and some of these requirements that they might not even know about. So you could have an employee apply for another job, decide they don't want to take it, and ignore that request and find out they get their CDL pulled.
This is Tracy Williams with Ohio Driver Training.
Yeah.
One additional step, if you go to the clearinghouse website, CDL students do have to register themselves with the clearinghouse. Once they get that CLP, they have the responsibility while they're in training. So if they're first time CDL students, they also have to register in the clearinghouse.
Thank you. Looked like Sean was uploading something else. Oh, you're welcome, Sean.
Any other questions? I guess one topic that was asked earlier, we will follow up with our FMCSA contacts and email the attendees here that we have all the emails for. And that question was about if their license is ever suspended, revoked, et cetera, do they have to go back through the ELDT training again? So we'll follow up just to confirm with our FMCSA contact, because that was a gray area in the regulation. It really doesn't specify. Anything else? Well, I guess if nobody has any other questions, or Chris or Matt have anything else, we can wrap this up. Just want to thank everybody for attending. Hope this was a big help to everybody. And you got about a week and a half to get ready for this all to start happening.
Quick.
What's that, Chris?
Said it's coming up quick, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. I see all these thank yous from everybody. You're very, very welcome. It has been a pleasure. Good luck.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Matt and Chris, if you guys stick around for a minute.
Sure.
Sounds good.